Who you lying up in front of me?
And you talk about a story. Look.
I got a kid. I'm going to talk about a kid.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 2 of season 4, 1994 Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Shot in nostalgia right here at the Turnbuckle Tavern. I'm good old Mike Belcaster, as always. And joining me, as always, my two best friends, the hosts with the most, the co-hosts with the most, all over the place. Who wants to go ahead first?
Colton, go ahead, dude. Introduce yourself, my man.
What's going on, y'all? Colton Jesse, Louisville, Kentucky zone, the Kentucky Waterfall, coming on in hot for episode 2 of Shot of Nostalgia of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, man. Mullet.mania on Instagram. You also catch me on Brace for Impact on Thursdays with my main man, ACEFIELD Retro.
And as always, live from No South Studios, it's the Ace of the Tavern, ACEFIELD Retro. And we are here, as you guys discussed, to talk about 2 months of Smoky Mountain Wrestling action, March and April. We appreciate all the good feedback for January and February. And we have a lot more content. And I think as the year goes on, guys, there's a lot more interesting stuff of why we chose this year and talking about all the great stuff on the talent sharing side of the people that appear on the Smoky Mountain in that ring is beyond words. Because as we continue to do the research, it's fascinating to see how many people actually work for the promotion. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a vast list of names that some that you might expect, a lot you probably wouldn't expect. So it's insane.
Well, so the thing is too, so we're going to be doing a lot of the stuff with the 2 months, talk about the TV tapings, and it's been working out that there's one major mega card show. So this one's going to be the Bluegrass Brawl 2, which took place on the beginning of April 1st to be exact, on 1994. And there's also this Marietta homecoming show that was WWF involved. So we have a lot of content to talk about, a lot of good stuff. And hopefully you guys enjoyed the format last week. Colton, I think you and I were discussing right before Mike got in the room over here, just about the feel of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and I guess the aesthetic we are taking away from this.
Yeah, man. I mean, there's like Mike said earlier, there's just so many names that you maybe would never think of seeing in a promotion that's running like literally high school gymnasiums, man. And I mean, that's not that's, you know, just unique that's unique to the region of the country that it's in. It's not because Smoky Mountain could afford to get into a bigger room. There aren't bigger rooms in some of these places, man. Like a lot of these towns they're running in the Appalachian region, especially Kentucky and Tennessee. I mean, you're talking towns of 800 to like 2,000 people, you know? So, I mean, a lot of these places, the high school gym is the only place that can hold more than, 250 people. So that's where they're running. It's we were talking right before we came on, just like for a promotion that's running these small venues, man, they've got an incredible production value. Bob Caudle, Dirty Dutch Mantel. I mean, their logo is fantastic. It's just some really good shit. Some of the best promo work probably of all time.
So before we get to those high school gymnasiums, we're going to take the DeLorean back to 1994. It's Dave Meltzer's office space, covered in paper, covered in typewriter ink. We're going to get there, get your fix, and find out what's happening in March of 1994.
Get your fix. Happy hour.
I was gonna say it was a little early to see Hulk Hogan all geeked up and ready to roll.
They were switched around for some reason, but of course it is the happy hour, guys. And 70 episodes in, we have to make sure we get the happy hour before we get our fix. You got to wet our whistles, and we're gonna find out what's happening in March 1994. We're gonna start with that Marietta show, the stuff going on with the WWF stuff, and what we don't think about with the talent sharing side. And we saw a little bit of that with Forbidden Doors injuries, but also availability. And we're gonna see some names pull out of this. And Owen Hart is going to be the name tapped to replace Jeff Jarrett in a 6-man tag match on the March 10th in Marietta, Georgia, since Jarrett was added to the WWF European Tour. Hart teams with Well Done against Brian and Scott and Steve Armstrong. So, Colton, we look at this, we talk about Forbidden Door, we talk about all the different relationships and working relationships. I would say Owen Hart is a better replacement than Jeff Jarrett.
Especially at this time. Yeah, I would 100% agree. I mean, I feel like, Jeff Jarrett's got he's got a nice long tenure in the world of professional wrestling. I mean, still going today, still wrestling, making towns for AEW. But at this point in time, Owen's a way bigger name. And I just feel like you're really kind of trading apples for oranges there. So I'm not really sure what they had to do to talk Owen into coming here. But I mean, I guess, he's used to working Stampede, working his dad's territory. So he's used to doing these smaller shows. But yeah, it was a big time get, I thought.
Mike, what are your thoughts on Owen Hart, especially as we lead into WrestleMania 10? He's going to be opening WrestleMania 10 with one of the best openers of all time. He'll have that main event push throughout the summer. He probably, undoubtedly, in my opinion, should have been the WWF World Champion by middle of the summer, because that cage match at SummerSlam 1994, one of the most memorable events that I've seen. Owen Hart was a certified main eventer, and for Smoky Mountain to grab him, I mean, really good get. No,
absolutely. I mean, let's talk about upgrading from a cheeseburger to a steak. I mean, you can't really go wrong here. And Jeff Jarrett, he's a little still, I wouldn't say he's, greener than goose shit, but he's still in the baby zone, and not, he's no Owen Hart. Owen Hart's a established name, a household name at this point in time. And he's also, I think he fits right in with Smoky Mountain. I mean, he's a very innovative pro wrestler, and to see him here, that's pretty badass, man.
So we move on with the debuting thrill seekers, of course, Chris Jericho and Lance Storm, as we know to love them. Used to work indies around Manitoba, according to Dave Meltzer at this time, in Alberta, as the tag team Sudden Impact. And Meltzer says who the territory looks to be built around as the hot young face tag team. They start on TV on 3/7, and they'll be in for what was going to be called and dubbed Golden Week for shows except for Marietta. Of course, that Marietta show is going to be dubbed for the talent share and WWF talent and showcasing what they're able to get in their doors. But, Mike, we talk about Chris Jericho and Lance Storm. We saw them a lot on TV this week. Presentation-wise, it seems like these guys are two wrestlers that just got it from the start and got their seasoning on the Canadian indie scene, but they seem to be well ahead of the pace of just being two guys debuting for a major promotion for the first time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A very well-oiled machine already coming in here with it. And, I mean, two of the best to ever lace up boots, in my opinion. I think Lance Storm is very, very underrated. Obviously, Jericho, innovator of his time, still rocking strong. I think it's nothing but good for Smoky Mountain to get these two young guys in there to showcase their things. And I mean, they're doing shit in the ring that we just are starting to see today. There's a lot of cool stuff coming on from both dudes. So yeah, a total win.
So part of this with Chris Jericho and Lance Storm, they have to finish up their dates with where they've been working prior. And that's also, we see that today. And, AAA, if they're finishing up dates, say for Kingo needs to finish up dates in AAA before he comes AEW and Bandito and all that stuff that was happening on our side. So it's no new thing for us to realize. But the other thing is the introduction of them. We have the first Thrill Seekers video airing on TV this weekend, showing them bungee jumping, horseback riding, flying in a helicopter, and ice skating. And Meltzer said was said to be one of the greatest wrestling music videos ever done. And, I don't know what the genre of wrestling music video would be. Of course, you can get With My Baby Tonight for Jeff Jarrett. That's a couple years from being made at this point. You can also go with that famous Vince McMahon video, Rock and Wrestling Connection with Hulk Hogan. However you want to look at it, I still say this Thrill Seeker stuff is very, very fun. And it fits the corniness, pun intended, of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. It really does. And I feel like you look past it right now and it's funny, but it's also even funnier to look at Lance Storm, who he became, that he is introduced to the American audience with this character.
No, 100%.
Any thoughts on that, Colton?
They're really leaning in. I appreciate how they're really leaning into the Thrill Seekers gimmick and not just letting it be a cool sounding name. Like that's a very Southern wrestling to do. It's like, oh, these guys are Thrill Seekers, so yeah, we're gonna have them jump off of fucking bungee jumping and doing skydiving and shit. Like, yeah, I think that's awesome. And just like we were talking about it last week, how Cornette knew these guys were going to be bona fide stars, and they really put a lot of stock into the vignettes and the videos that they did prior to these guys debuting, for a promotion that at this point was, only a couple of years old. Like, it's obvious that he saw something in them because they put a lot of stock going in these guys before they even made their way to TV.
So we have some funny stuff going on too on the tapings, 226 in Johnson City, where we covered last week. Meltzer covers it here and says Chris Candido was defending the U.S. junior title against Tracy Smothers. Candido got on the mic and was complaining that Smothers was no junior heavyweight, to the point where obviously it's painfully obvious that Tracy Smothers is a bigger guy. Candido demanded Smothers be weighed right there to see if he was under 230 pounds. And even though Smothers weighs a legit 250, as the scale showed, it was announced the scale read 228, and it was for a title match. Candido wound up hitting Smothers with the scale and getting the pin to retain the title. Reminded me a lot of, do you guys remember the whole stuff with Cody Rhodes? And I forget the dude, the Golden Punch English guy that Big Show was doing the scale and they couldn't figure out the manual scale on AEW television.
Yeah.
When you use a scale in the ring, especially where clearly it was read that he was 250, Meltzer picked it up right there. You know, Colton, we looked at this and like clearly he's not a junior heavyweight, but we get caught in semantics. Who's a heavyweight? Who's a cruiserweight? Didn't matter. The match needed to happen. Tracy Smothers versus Chris Candido, but they went as far to do it to make comedy out of it, which is pro wrestling at its best.
Oh yeah, using some real hillbilly math there, being like, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's 228. He's good to go." Yeah, it's I love that shit though, man. I mean, it's because I was my first thought when we first heard they were going to have this match. I'm like, well, and like the definition in wrestling of heavyweights and cruiserweights and junior heavyweights and light heavyweights. I mean, how many times have the chains been moved on that historically? You know, like I remember back in the day, you know, the cruiserweights it was 215. You know, was the cutoff, and then fast forward 20 years later, you got 205 live. We took a whole 10 pounds off of it because most of our heavyweight guys are 215 to 220, whereas previously 10 years before, when everybody was on the gas, they were 240 to 280. So.
Yeah, in 2003, they actually leaned into that for the cruiserweight stuff when Matt Hardy was doing the cruiserweight when he was version 1 and he was doing the training videos with Shannon Moore.
Yeah,
and they fudged those numbers too, but it's just funny when you look at that and you take it on the nose and say like he needs to be a certain weight, and wrestling is wrestling. They're going to pull the wool over people's eyes the way they do it. But speaking of pull the wool of people's eyes, we got our famous character that we introduced last week, Prince Karras, and Daryl Van Horn is his manager here. He's complaining that he's not getting title shots, and Van Horn is dead serious, deadpan in the camera, saying that the wrestling world is prejudiced against him since he hasn't gotten any credit for resurrecting Karras, which he complained was a miracle equal to parting of the Red Sea and turning water into wine, and that said that Smoky Mountain Wrestling should change its name to the PTL Club because it's turned into the Jim and Tammy Show. Honestly, that's a reference lost on me as far as that year in 1994. It's a cultural reference that probably popped a lot of people. My main point of taking this, and we won't see a lot of Prince Karras, Mike Belcaster, but we're looking at Prince Karras through our lens now. We talked last week, as far as putting effort into it, you got to give him an A for that. But
yeah,
the character here, it was so different than what was being offered in the Smoky Mountain Wrestling menu, I would say. What are your thoughts on Prince Karras now that we've seen, I guess, 2 months of him? We've seen at least a little bit. We've read about him. Have you softened your stance on the character?
Not really, but I would like to throw out, it is a very likened character to what the Undertaker was at the time. Like, it's got that kind of vibe to it. They're trying. They really are trying. It's not working, but they're trying. So maybe non-resurrect this idea again. We'll put it away in the tomb. We'll bury it way in the depths. We'll call Indiana Jones. He can put that shit in the big, wooden warehouse, and everything will be good.
So we have the Japanese super catalog that just came out. So it lists all wrestlers, and it's their age, height, weight, birthday, etc. of all the wrestling stars. It was something that people grabbed and they wanted to make sure they had it to have like a research catalog, because we didn't have the internet at the time in 1994. So Prince Karras in there is listed as his age. You guessed it, 3,000 years old. And Meltzer says it's a miracle that Baba can still work at 56, but Prince Karras can't, he's working here at 3,000 years old. Really funny, especially Japanese super catalog, which we know how serious the Japanese wrestling culture is, where everything is so, authentic. And even they were playing into this Karras thing, and you got to at least laugh at it, right?
Yeah, no, that's beautiful.
Yeah, and I love that Van Horn just got so hot that nobody was appreciating the fact that he performed a resurrection. So to go back to the PTL reference there, Ace, so this is definitely more of, at the time, but also regionally. So PTL Club stands for Praise the Lord Club, and it was a television program. It was an evangelical Christian television program back in that time with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker, which is like loosely the family that the Righteous Gemstones is based on.
Put your hand on the screen and touch the screen. Touching the screen. Prince Karras has been resurrected.
Send a check to P.O. Box. We'll read your prayer live on TV next week.
So speaking of All Japan, a deal between Smoky Mountain Wrestling and All Japan is in preliminary negotiations. We'll see if that comes to fruition. But Smoky Mountain Wrestling has opened their doors to different promotions and bringing in talent from all over the world. And this is not only a good thing for them, but it's a good thing for professional wrestling. And we continue to see that strategy work for promotions all over today. As long as everyone's willing to work together and negotiate and be fair to each other, these things have continued. And we talk about Forbidden Door as a new concept. We say it every time we talk about any sort of negotiations between different promotions. This has happened. History has repeated itself, and we can make sure it happens consistently because that's how talent grows and learns how to work in front of different audiences. The thing about Chris Jericho and Lance Storm, they worked in front of Canadian audiences and Chris Jericho in front of Mexican audiences, but working in front of an audience in Tennessee or Kentucky or anywhere in this area, it's way different. I mean, every crowd is different. So you're just kind of honing your skills and being a better rounded wrestler. So we're going to the March 21st, 1994 newsletter, and we're opening up here with another show this past week received a lot of interest nationally, but apparently not enough locally, was the Smoky Mountain Wrestling card on 310 in Marietta, Georgia. And we'll, of course, talk about that super show that no one really talks about. It reminds us of the WCW super show from back in the day, Mike, that we found out live on air about Shot Nostalgia in 1996 for WCW. Yeah. The show drew 1,075 paid and 1,200 total, I guess, including other people, family and friends that got in for free, and a total of $9,500 for a show in which the Smoky Mountain talent was augmented by several WWF stars. Meltzer says it was definitely a good show, although it was surprising the lack of crowd heat for the show as compared to the most Smoky Mountain house shows. So, Colton, I bring that to you. What do you attribute that to as far as the SMW bubble not popping or reacting the way they probably thought that to the WWF huge stars are coming over from New York?
So, I mean, it could be a couple of different things. I mean, especially here. So, I mean, Marietta is a suburb of Atlanta. So, and at this point in time, I'm not sure what the population was, but like today, it's a pretty wealthy suburb of Atlanta. It's about 60 to, I'd say around 62,000 people probably roughly live there. So, I mean, at this point, it could just be, like you said, there's no internet. It's TV exposure is what everybody's used to. In Atlanta, like that's Turner country, man. You're seeing WCW down there pretty much exclusively, maybe a little USWA. You're not seeing, these WWF, these New York names aren't necessarily pulling as much attention from some of these local Southern folks for sure, but who are more used to the names that they're seeing on WCW.
So we have this appearing on local channel 14, which is not a national exposure. It's just in the local area, and it's where Smoky Mountain usually airs. And it's, according to Meltzer, the weakest station in the market and not on many key cable systems, which runs a Saturday night wrestling block that doesn't have a great deal of exposure, as the crowd seemed a combination of hardcores who reacted to spots and fans who liked the show but really didn't know the storylines. And he continued, unlike most wrestling promotions, SMW's product is not based on delivering stars to the arena, but putting on compelling storylines. And I thought that spoke volumes, Mike Belcaster, on everything that Smoky Mountain Wrestling was about. It's not about really the in-ring work. It's not about the star power. It's about the storylines that even the most mid-card, lower-card storyline is given time and depth and interviews, and it feels like everyone is well-developed, which you can't say that a lot about the promotions at the time.
No, absolutely. I mean, they do a really good job building that up so well. I mean, I credit Jim Cornette, obviously, and probably Dutch Mantel as well. I mean, for getting that those undercard stories very established. But I think it's got a lot to do with WWF coming into the Southern territory too. A lot of people probably frowning upon the WWF talent, especially '94. This is Ric Flair country. you can't just be throwing your own hearts out here and expect people to be drawing names. No,
it's a good point. And like most of the stuff that happened, interesting wise, on the show happened backstage, according to Meltzer. Numerous wrestlers, both from other groups and local wrestlers, were there. We had names that we're very familiar with. Dory Funk was there scouting for All Japan, which we talked about before, maybe forming a relationship with Smoky Mountain. We had numerous WCW officials, Gary Juster, Chris Potenza, and Rob Parker. Jim Ross was also backstage watching the show, and they talked about how Ross was suffering from another Bell's palsy bout. It just feels like we just talked about that in 1998, but here he is in 94 suffering through the same stuff. So it's like a lifelong battle for Jim Ross. But, this is one of the first times, by the way, it was ever talked about in wrestling media about the Bell's palsy stuff. So interesting to see that here. Because he can't do job interviews, according to Meltzer, and there's no way of knowing when the condition will improve enough when he can. But we'll talk a little bit about these people watching talent, but I think it speaks a lot about the influx of people flocking to the show, not even just the fans, Colton, but the people that were in the business to see, hey, this is at least an experiment that I'm curious how it works out. And I'm at least going to show up to see if I can make something out of this by looking at the SMW talent, maybe even looking at some of the WWF talent. It was like a feeding ground for scouting from Dory Funk and from all these WCW guys.
Yeah, man, that's I think that speaks volumes about the type of product they were putting on. Like like you guys just referenced, like just the story development and the fact that it's not just, dream matches and big name stars. It's like, I think that's where the wrestling the way it used to be part of the tagline comes from, is it kind of going back to the old, the formula in a way, as we talk about a lot when we talk about Impact. Like the shows definitely follows some sort of a formula where you get a good match, you get a backstage segment, you get story, you get something calling back to the week before. And yeah, I mean, I think that's just having Dory Funk and, like you said, Gary Juster, Rob Parker, and I mean, even JR backstage, man, at this time, like it definitely shows that what they're doing is carrying some weight, even though it is on a much smaller scale.
Yeah,
I agree. And I mean, speaking of this channel 14 block of wrestling, they had and we'll reference it a few times throughout all the newsletters, is this mixed bag of different type of wrestling that is on the show. It was USWA, WCW, and Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And they were listing WCW Worldwide and all the beginning of the block, and on the listing in the TV guide as wrestling ? And that was, I guess, spoke to, the emphasis that Channel 14 even put on this. We're all familiar. We all have grown up in age where local television was advertisements. It was a lot of the evangelical stuff that you referenced to, Colton, with that other show. It was a mixed bag of things where if you're flipping through the channels, you don't know what you're going to get. So it's not really attracting an audience that can be consistent. But we had, all this stuff is kind of speaking to, this was destined to fail in its own way. I think it was successful. But as far as this show, if they're looking for this box office success, I think it speaks more to just the way the wrestling business was set up, Mike. Like, I don't think it was more of it was never going to be this huge number, because it just, the infrastructure wasn't there for them to do well with a huge gate, because that wasn't the market yet.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, we seen, even when we were covering ECW, some of those smaller shows that they were doing. It's when you pigeonhole yourself so much, it's hard to grow, So I feel like a lot of that is the contributor to it.
So we moved into this. We talked about this off air, but we'll definitely talk about it when we get to it, with Tracy Smothers and Chris Candido probably having the match of all the matches we've seen thus far. Meltzer gave it 4 stars. It was a ladder match on TV, and they've been doing ladder matches on house shows throughout the whole run through here. And of course, you could find the results of those, but we can't watch them. They've been doing a $2,500 check at the top where you had to go grab it. And after the match, Candido hit Smothers with the ladder and ran off with the check after losing, but gave it 4 stars. Of course, Colton, we don't talk about work rate during Smoky Mountain. That's not why we picked this era to review. But I had to say, I walked away looking at, seeing some of the stuff they were doing. And this is before we're about to get the first ever ladder match on the WWF side, which we all are. We don't talk about Fed Brain and being brainwashed by WWF and being fans of them. Ladder matches were happening long before Razor and Shawn had it for the IC title at WrestleMania 10. It just was very appropriate to me that they had a great one, Tracy Smothers and Chris Candido right here. And nobody was talking about it because Shawn Michaels and Razor Ramon went out and MSG and stole the show and had what was a really, really good match. But I think if you put Smothers and Candido in the same spotlight, maybe they would have been remembered the same or even more fondly.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I think if they'd had the level of exposure as the one at WrestleMania 10 did, I think it would have gotten a little bit more. I mean, for Meltzer to give it 4 stars is a pretty resounding review, man. I mean, it's, especially you think about the kind of matches he gives 4 stars to these days. Like, yeah, it's some pretty harsh criteria to meet. And I mean, yeah, it was. Like I said, we'll talk to it more when we get to the show. But it was a fun match. There was a couple of spots in it that were like pretty intense. My favorite thing about it, though, man, is that the $2,500 check. I just assumed it would be like some big gimmick check, like you see these like fundraisers and everything. It's like, no, dude, it's a regular check out of a checkbook, like clipped onto a line. I thought that was great.
If you look carefully enough, you can see the teared edges from where it was torn out of the
out of the book earlier that day.
Exactly. So when we're reading this next, Colton, if you could do me a favor, if you could find out, if you just Google Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, find out what Meltzer gave that match. I'm curious if it got more of a star rating than this. I'm very curious. I want to say it's 4.5, but as Colton's doing that, we have the ring truck breaking down, coming to the 311 show in Paintsville, Kentucky to Johnson City. So that he used Tim Horner's school wrestling ring in JC, which nearly isn't as good. But they had two 4-star matches in Johnson City, which Meltzer says Rock and Roll Express and the Bodies did a classic marathon match on 313 in Knoxville. It was tied 2-2 when Morton had Pritchard out with the sleeper, but Cornette came out, revived Pritchard with an oxygen tank, and hit Morton with the oxygen tank to win the title for the 5th fall in, 59 minutes and 40 seconds. Want to talk about us going to the limit of 2 hours? 60-minute tag matches going forward. Mike Belcaster. These guys are redefining what tag wrestling is, and still, I think they are the bar for tag wrestling. We always talk about the Hardys and the Dudleys, Edge and Christian, and even FTR today. I think FTR would more resonate with that type of fandom. Rock and Roll and the Bodies, I think they would have even bigger classic matches and give the FTR a chance to go 60 minutes. I know Dax and Cash can do that. Come on.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I keep talking about it. I want to see an Iron Man tag match in AEW so bad with FTR and do the Bucks. Fuck it. Like, give us what we want, damn it. But I love to see such a beautiful emphasis put on tag team wrestling. And obviously Cornette loves his Southern tag team wrestling, man. But Rock and Roll is just a whole different kind of spice that you add to the mixture, man. They go out there and they tear the house down, and this is amazing.
So we also have 2 out of 3 falls on Collision, which is going to be the Bullet Club Gold versus FTR. So that's in the same vein. It's not 60-minute marathon matches, but still it's a step, right? For the tag titles, we get 2 out of 3 falls. Hell yeah. So I'm into that. But, man, I would kill for a 60-minute Iron Man match with the tag teams. Let FTR go all day, man. I would love it.
100%.
That FTR Bullet Club Gold match from this Collision was fantastic. I wish I had timed it because I feel it went over 30. I know it did. I mean, it had to have gone. So I wouldn't be surprised if this 2 out of 3 goes 45. Like, it might not be a 60-minute in the title, but it's going to get damn close. Ace, going back to your, you said you predicted 4.5. Or 4.75 for it. So Dave gave that match a 5-star rating.
Wow.
And there is actually some controversy that the first thing, as soon as I looked it up, the first thing that came up was people talking about how Owen versus Brett from the same card only got 4.75 stars that night.
Wow.
Now, a lot of people thought that was bullshit. When Razor and Sean got 5. So,
I mean, that argument can be made. Like, personally on that card, I love Owen and Brett. It's my favorite opener. I mean, next to Ray and Eddie at WrestleMania 21, I mean, you can make the argument 1A, 1B type of stuff for me. But, man, that ladder match, again, when we talk about our fandom living here in the Northeast on my end, we are brainwashed where we think that they invented the ladder match, where we're seeing it right here in the same exact year with 2 guys that are capable of putting on a clinic. They just didn't do it under the bright lights of MSG. They happened to do it at the Civic Center. And, like, that's a different stage. And we just talk about rewriting history, and we do this all the time with, ECW and WWE, WWF didn't invent wrestling, guys. Like, so I think that's the most important thing we're taking away from these seasons of shot of nostalgia, is realizing wrestling is a bigger universe than starting in 1985 when Hulk Hogan opened the doors for WrestleMania 1 at MSG. It's just not how it happened. So shout out to Tracy Smothers, Chris Candido in that ladder match. Go and watch that match and enjoy it, because other stuff has happened prior to WWF being in existence, guys. My rant is done.
I love it.
So anything else on the controversy?
Shout out. Oh, no, I was just going to say for the ladder match, shout out to Corny's mom for putting up a $2,500 check. That's a nice prize, especially in 1994.
100%. As we move to the March 28th, 1994 newsletter, we have Jericho leaving for a tour with WAR, Lance Storm returning home to Canada to get married. The Thrill Seekers will not be back until May, so we got a little taste of what they can bring. But of course, we'll get them next episode. You guys don't have to wait. We got 2 months covering, so it's not a long wait for us. And we also have the Heavenly Bodies. They're gone until probably November. Cornette's going to be managing Bruiser Bedlam, who we also known as Johnny K9 from other independents and promotions. And he's going to be getting a major push as the top singles heel. So big is that we're going to see him wrestle, and we'll talk about it. We're going to be wrestling Randy Savage on a show here for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And Bruiser Bedlam is a guy they put a lot of heat on. We'll see him showcased a lot, Mike Belcaster. But as far as your presentation, your thoughts on a Bruiser Bedlam, do you think he's enough? He fits an old school heel, but what were your thoughts on him initially?
Listen, I think he's got the look. I think he's got the sprite. I think Macho Man is going to be a beautiful showcase for him. Like, you want to show somebody off, and you bring in a name like Randy Savage to come in and step toe to toe I think it's going to showcase this dude in a completely different light, but it also show that he's still that dirty damn heel that he is. I love it, man.
So that was pretty much it for the March 28th newsletter. We're going to the April 4th, 1994 newsletter. We have interviews with Vince McMahon. Yes, that Vince McMahon. And Eddie Marlin aired on TV, where both plugged the 4-1 Pikeville card and said they'd welcome the losing team into their federation. And so Vince McMahon is being featured on these shows, which interesting how that works. And I'm not sure how the local, I don't know, like I just picture Vince McMahon filming stuff for them. It just seems bizarre in the world where Vince McMahon is working collaboratively with another promotion, specifically Jim Cornette. But Colton, your thoughts on this?
I thought that was pretty wild, man. And I mean, obviously they're referencing the cage match, right, between the Rock and Roll Express and the Heavenly Bodies, right, where the loser has to leave Smoky Mountain. So yeah, the fact that a town, Pikeville is, I think they ran this show at the Pikeville College arena, which is now Pikeville University. But just for everybody's just reference, Pikeville today is like, it is the county seat there, but it is in Pike County, but it's only like 7,700 people. So the fact that town is the name of that town has even made it to Vince McMahon's vocabulary blows my mind. That he would even like that's a blip on his radar anywhere. So I mean, obviously Rock and Roll Express and Heavenly Bodies, both huge names, and I mean maybe he had his eye on Tom Pritchard. I mean, we know Dr. Tom went there and trained anybody and everybody for many, many years. So yeah, maybe this was where Vince first started scouting him to bring him up there to do that work. But yeah, I thought it was pretty cool. I mean, another, we were just talking about how the week before they were, you had WCW eyes and of course Dory from All Japan. Like, I mean, it doesn't get any bigger than having old Vinnie Mac plugging your next super show.
100%. And that's the other thing we got to remember, that the original WWF was built upon stars established elsewhere. The Hulk Hogans, the Junkyard Dogs, like Roddy, everybody that you know and love that think that the WWF machine created. It's just not true. So I think they're trying to find guys. Smoky Mountain Wrestling is a hub to find these guys. They're talented guys that haven't been given the shine and polish that WWF can give. Those WWF cameras do wonders for people, and the WWF machine, now WWE machine, can take people and shine them up and take what their skills are and really strengthen them to a larger audience that doesn't do a lot of deep diving. The same is true today, 1994, and also today in 2023. It's all very true. So I think a lot of Vince McMahon's motivations is he's being giving for sure, but I think he's out there looking to restock the talent pool of WWF. And I think that's a smart business decision, but it's profitable for both sides. So going to the April 11th, 1994 newsletter, we have Volunteer Slam 2. And this is going to be the event that they hype up. It's going to be taking place. We'll cover it next week, May 20th. And this is the bigger event they're covering. And it's going to be headlined by, as we mentioned, Bruiser Bedlam and Randy Savage. But we're going to also have Dirty White Boy defending that Smoky Mountain title against Jake the Snake Roberts. So Savage and Bedlam is going to be taking place on 521 in Morristown the night after, and also in 522 in Marietta, Georgia. They'll just be house shows. And Dory Funk is coming to Marietta in a singles match with Tracy Smothers. So don't want this to be lost on us. Jake Roberts, it happened all these years ago. If you didn't know, Jake Roberts will be the Smoky Mountain Wrestling champion by this time next episode. It's insane to think about Jake Roberts and Randy Savage, where they were in their careers. Yes, they're a couple years removed. Yes, Randy Savage is kind of perceived as damaged goods on the WWF side. They've relegated him to the announce desk. He will make his return at WrestleMania 10, Wrestling Crush, and like a Falls Count Anywhere match, but he's not looked upon in the same light. And he's only a year and a half, maybe not even, from going to WCW and reinvented his in-ring career. But Randy Savage is still Randy Savage, and Jake the Snake Colton is still Jake the Snake.
Yeah, man. I mean, Jake Roberts is one of my favorites from when I was a kid, and I think he is just fucking perfect for Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Like Jake Roberts is very Smoky Mountain Wrestling and slides in. Even though he is a bigger name than the promotion, I think he fits really, really well here, man.
Belcaster, as far as Randy Savage, seeing him in a Smoky Mountain Wrestling ring, it's bizarre to me. Is it just as bizarre to you?
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, it's like having Hulk Hogan go down to ECW. It's like, it's fucking wild, man. But I think it's more beneficial for Smoky Mountain than anything. And again, Randy Savage, talk about star power. Every kid in the world wants to see Randy Savage. So I mean, this is huge for them. Absolutely huge. It's like the names being thrown around, the Owen Harts, the Randy Savages, even Jake the Snake Man. That's huge for a company that's running these, tight and tiny show.
It's bizarre to me too, like how the mindset has changed, and I think it's life in general that 40 is the new 30 type of stuff, and looking at wrestlers' prime is not the same as it used to be. But Randy Savage at the time, when you're hearing about him being ridden out of active competition on WWF side, it's crazy to look at what Bryan Danielson's doing now at an older age, Chris Jericho, of course, and we still got Sting jumping off goddamn ladders on Wednesday nights. So it's a shame to me because it feels like we could have gotten more out of Randy Savage, especially with that new crop of talent. And he's linked up with Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels while they were there, but not in the same capacity at the main event status. Having Randy Savage as that stalwart to bridge the gap to new main eventers could have been beneficial. Instead, he went over to Turner and did his own thing. And, people say a lot of their fandom comes from Randy Savage there, so I don't want to take away from it. But being a fan of WWF growing up, man, I really miss Randy Savage when he disappeared to the other channel, dude.
Yeah, no, 100%, man. It was crazy. Only to be losing titles on, Monday Night Nitro. It's not like he was going over there to be doing great shit.
Speaking of Prince Karras, we know his name is Rob Mays, shoot name, so we can look him up and talk about him. He was ridden out as he had a title shot against White Boy, but White Boy won the match by hitting Karras over the head with his own loaded forearm and knocking him out. After the match, Kendo the Samurai blew mist in White Boy's eyes, and next week White Boy came out with a patch over one eye, so they'd be programmed at the arenas. What made them get cold feet, Colton? If you're Jim Cornette and Prince Karras, like you went all in, you put him in a title program. Here he is against Dirty White Boy, and you panic after the first match. What do you think happened?
I don't know, man. I just feel like if you're going to go straight to a title match with Karras, where else do you go with him after that? I feel like, they already, to prove that he was a real mummy in an earlier segment leading up to this, they had him cut off his fucking thumb and pour sand out of this loaded arm, which is like, I want you to sit and think about that for a minute. That is... You don't see dedication to a gimmick like that in today's wrestling. Anyway, no one's coming close to that. It's I don't know, man. I think they were like, maybe this is the best way to get it in and get it out. We don't want to just completely write him off, have him show up and do one match and then have him never be seen again, especially because, Van Horn's he's good on the mic. The guy's got some talent. Have him go up against Dirty White Boy, but where do you go from there at that point? You can't just really bump him back down to the mid card. I mean, I think, once he suffers that kind of defeat and also such a, embarrassing defeat of having your own forearm used against you as a weapon, I feel like you kind of got to go back to the sarcophagus at that point, brother. Like you're going back. It's all she wrote. Like you're going back to the dirt now.
So April 18th, there wasn't a lot of Smoky Mountain stuff going on, but we talked about channel 14 that was covering all the wrestling in Atlanta, known as WTLK. They have a Saturday block. It was sold to Christian Broadcasting Group, which means they'll be cutting back to 3 hours of wrestling per week. They were at 6. The block they have now currently is an eclectic mix of different promotions just put together for Atlanta television. So if you're an Atlanta kid listening to this, it probably speaks to you. Like, why is WWF, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, WCW, and USWA all on the same run? Well, they were playing delayed tapes from all over the place, from all those promotions. And it's pretty much where Smoky Mountain Wrestling was living for that market. And they're planning on making Marietta a regular stop, but that means that the station's penetration, for lack of a better word, is weak because they're not on cable. How are people in Georgia going to even know Smoky Mountain Wrestling is going on in Marietta if they're not able to consume it? So it's kind of a lose-lose situation where WCW, and you can also make the argument that maybe someone on Turner's side got in the ear, because this is, like, as Belcaster so beautifully said, this is Flair country, brother. Like, we want to make sure that WCW continues to eat, because we're already worried about WWF on the other side. We can't be worried about Smoky Mountain coming up and taking food off our table, right? Are we agreeing with that?
100%, man. That's what I mean. I mean, there's got to be some little rivalry going on from the north and the south going with wrestling teams. Like, especially seeing all the WWF talent coming in, WCW, Turner probably like, no, man, we don't want this shit on our television. You stick it on channel 14. We're good,
where
man.
everything goes to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, PTL Club strikes again, man. And Jim and Tammy Faye Baker just came and took 3 more hours of wrestling away from the fans.
Channel 14 in my area was always the blue channel. I'm not sure if you guys had a blue channel where it would be a TV guide where it would scroll through, play some like soft radio elevator tunes type of stuff. And that's how you found what was on TV. So, but we used to have local television like that. They would play infomercials, but they'd also play every once in a while. You get like local skateboarding that happened to be on. I guess they bought the time slot, but that was how wrestling was perceived. It wasn't this big draw of like we had WBD and Fox and everybody arguing over who's going to have the rights to wrestling. We were not even close to that yet. It's amazing to see since 1994 in our lifetime. I'm born before 94 until we are now, where wrestling is this valuable entity of TV time. If you would have invested it at this point, man, Channel 14 might have been thriving. This Christian broadcast, we just didn't have the foresight. It's unbelievable. So let's go to the final newsletter quickly. April 25th, 1994. Want to just touch on this because this is something we don't really hear about this initial relationship between WCW and ECW starting 4/16 in 94. And we covered 95, so a lot of this was already said and done by this point. Or we had a lot of WCW talent getting involved with ECW talent at the ECW arena. And the story behind this, according to Meltzer, was that WCW wanted to work with ECW in the Northeast to aid in promoting Slamboree in Philadelphia, plus his revenge against the WWF for aiding Smoky Mountain Wrestling cards in Marietta, Georgia. So Gary Juster, who has become Bischoff's right-hand man in many aspects, offered Todd Gordon any wrestler in return for a proposed deal, which included WCW getting 4 weeks of 1 ad per show for Slamboree on the ECW shows and an interview with Funk plugging the match with Tully Blanchard Slamboree on the show. Shows the ripple effect, Colton, that we're seeing here, that these guys, strange bedfellows, are willing to work together to promote the show. Of course, Philadelphia, Slamboree, that makes sense. But the thing that was sticking in their craw was Smoky Mountain Wrestling, WWF in bed together. Like, well, we're going to get ECW. So what do you think about that, Colton?
I mean, they're going pretty far. They're geographically, they're traveling some miles to form these alliances, man. I mean, you've got, Atlanta is where WCW is based out of. They're going up to Philly and making friends with ECW. And then, the fact that we're running out of Knoxville, Tennessee, mainly for Smoky Mountain. And it would make so much more sense to me, just looking at it geographically, that Smoky Mountain would affiliate itself with WCW instead of the big monster machine out of New York. So, yeah, man, it's pretty wild shit, but it doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, in the world of pro wrestling, it's a very vindictive business and a very like, oh, well, you did this to me, well, I'm going to do this to you in response. So yeah, not surprising to me whatsoever that WCW reached out to ECW, because there's only so much you can do, only so much you can take of Jim Cornette coming in and taking, like we said, man, it's a good drinking game. It's anywhere between 3 and 6 jabs or shots at WCW every week on the TV.
So speaking of the vindictive nature of wrestling, we know the bad blood between Paulie Dangerously, who's not the head of the table quite yet for ECW, but we know he's very influential with Todd Gordon. He has a lot of heat with WCW higher up, in particular Bill Shaw and Bob Dew, who, because of his dismissal and post-dismissal legal action was handled, initially didn't want to make the deal, but asked for Steve Austin and Brian Pillman first, with Pillman being Sabu's mystery opponent for the show. I mean, big names being tossed around here. WCW eventually turned down the request, not wanting either to be injured at Spring Stampede the next day. But they sent Arn Anderson and Bobby Eaton to the show to do an angle and several weeks worth of interviews leading up to the 5/14 show. So we get into the semantics of all that, with all the names and specifics to that. But it also shows how strategic WWF was, Mike Belcaster, because Colton, you hit it on the head, man. It made a lot of sense for WCW and Smoky Mountain Wrestling to do business and continue it for a long time. But you can tell Vince McMahon was smart. For playing a game of Risk or whatever that game of the board game is, he put his piece right in between them, thinking that WCW wouldn't go out of their way to go to Philly. But no, Bischoff and the crew were like, we're going to go to Philly. We're running Slamboree there. We'll get in bed with ECW and work out with them. So, I mean, who benefits from this? The smaller guys. ECW and Smoky Mountain Wrestling benefited from the pissing match between WCW and WWF, where we're getting talent at a younger stage, getting exposed on a big stage. And this continues throughout the history of wrestling, but it's very evident that SMW and ECW were benefiting from this.
Yeah, 100%. But look how it played out in the long run. I mean, obviously ECW got the smarter hand of working with both WCW and WWF, and Smoky Mountain fell by the wayside. ECW ended up sucking up a lot of Smoky Mountain's talent much like WWF would have done with WCW. It's a beautiful story.
I'll be curious too as we continue to do this and read in the newsletter, and everybody can wax poetic with the nostalgia piece about SMW and talk about what they liked about it, and it just didn't work out. I want to know why it didn't work out, and we're seeing some of those seeds being planted with the Channel 14 stuff, with the relationships, and not, they threw a huge Hail Mary with this WWF show, and it only drew less than 1,500 people. The fact that happened, the writing was kind of on the wall because they were a niche product that wasn't ever really going to get the exposure it took to thrive in a market that, wrestling was starting to grow exponentially. We referenced how it was such a, it was a smaller piece to the puzzle of the entertainment value. Now looking at where wrestling is, there was no way SMW was keeping up unless they changed the way they did things. And, that's not how they do business though. So they could probably still exist in a smaller entity, but they were trying to keep pace with these bigger guys, and it just wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, it's like throwing an indie company up against the wall like a thing of spaghetti and seeing if it'll stick in the Monday Night Wars. But I think they had a great job. It's complete the opposite of the ECW effect. I think that they didn't want to grow. They weren't trying to get on every TV station throughout the United States. They were happy to be in the Smoky Mountains and just chilling and doing their thing.
It goes back to the tagline, man. Wrestling the way it used to be and the way you like it. They were dedicated to being that way and not compromising in any way, shape, or form, no matter whether it benefited them or it hurt them. And I love that WCW came to the table to ECW and was like, hey, you can have anybody you want. And then Paulie Dangerous is like, yo, let me get Pillman and Steve Austin. They're like, well, maybe not. Maybe there's no way in hell we're letting Brian Pillman wrestle fucking Sabu right before this. There's no way he'll kill him.
Here's Arn Anderson. Just be happy with what you got.
Oh man, so fantastic. And I love to pull those threads because that's a lot of stuff people don't talk about because it's so short-lived. It doesn't have the historic value to really sit in a documentary in the WWE universe where they create these, whatever, they're propaganda pieces, for lack of a better name. But the last 7 minutes of TV on 4/9, this really spoke to me as we kind of say goodbye to the newsletter. Meltzer's talking about this Jim Cornette interview after the Loser Leaves Town match. And Meltzer says it may be the best 7 minutes of wrestling TV this year. And he ends his quote here saying, wrestling is about stirring emotion, and it really doesn't take a ton of money to produce TV that accomplishes that on purpose. All the money in the world can't buy it, though, if you don't understand how to do it. So I thought this was so beautifully said because it kind of captures what makes Smoky Mountain Wrestling still resonate with a fan base today, where you look at through their lens of, they were doing this with one camera, maybe two, like someone at ringside with a hard cam, no lights in production, no pyro, just very bare bones. But what they could do is they had the talent, specifically Jim Cornette, really driving that force of being very critical and very picky about who he puts on a screen and making sure that they have the chops to deliver an emotionally driven product. And looking at Jim Cornette, just that interview, for Meltzer to say it was the best 7 minutes of wrestling TV all year speaks volumes because we're watching this stuff and I'm captivated by a lot of that. We talk about the in-ring work. We talk about the Smothers and Candido match, but Colton, like the interviews, everybody you said last week, we compared it to the Jungle Boy trying to get his legs under him promo wise. Everybody that's here, they have a purpose in their promo. They get their point across and they continue to drive their point home in a very eloquent way. And Jim Cornette was the latest example of it, that he was one of a kind. He really is one of one.
Yeah, man. And there's a lot of one guys on this roster. Dirty White Boy, man. It's that guy's face promos are incredible. Like I'm hanging on every single word every time that he has one. And that's a pretty incredible review from Dave to say the best 7 minutes in wrestling all year. And granted, so what? We're 4 months into the year. We're in the first quarter of the year. So there's still a lot of year left, a lot of things to come for 1994. But that's a pretty resounding review, man. And but he's got a point. I think this was at a time, like you said, 1994, WWF and WCW, they're competing, but not, we're not to the Monday Night War level yet. Then Vince has been buying up, he's basically been killing territories, buying up all these talent to build his super wrestling federation. And he's operating on, name recognition and work rate more than he is on storytelling. Kind of like a lot of the same critiques that people give of AEW nowadays. Actually, it's like, oh, it's a lot of dream matches instead of stories. It's like that's the kind of shit people were saying about. Those were criticisms that WWF was getting at the time. And yeah, I just think that's kind of wild how it all runs in a cycle. But yeah, it's just, I mean, I'm surprised I'd not heard that previously, that he had, that I feel like you should lead with anybody talking about Smoky Mountain Wrestling ever. You should lead with the fact, like, man, Meltzer's one time said it was the best fucking 7 minutes in television history for the entire year. Like,
yeah. I mean, it also speaks volumes about where wrestling was, and it kind of, you reference full circle of everybody. The old guard wants to shit down and shoot down the new guy in town. And at the time, Vince McMahon is less than 10 years in the big business. Of course, he was doing stuff with his dad probably prior to 85, but we got to remember how new WWF really was. And they became super popular, super quick. And at this point, they're already past WrestleMania 1. They're about to do WrestleMania 10, but it's a short period of time where there's still the old guard that is doing things on the WCW side. Like, we don't like what they're doing. We want to cut them down at the pass and make sure that everybody knows that what they're doing is not going to stick, because the old way is the way we do it. And right, wrong, or indifferent, the way Vince did things changed the way business was done forever. And you can make the argument 30 years from now, people are going to look very fondly on what Tony Khan's doing, even though there's a fan base and people in the business that are critical of it right now. Just the way things work in life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could preach that to any form of time period, man, but it's true, and history does repeat itself. But I think, much like Jim Cornette, Tony Khan's doing a great job right now. Much like Vince McMahon, Tony Khan's doing a great job. It all brings out the past and comes right into the present, man. I mean, everybody's going to find something to shit on something for, but it's wrestling. That's the fan base. It's very toxic, but when it's done right and beautifully, you remember it down the line, and that's where we are with Smoky Mountain right now.
Yeah, it's honestly, it rings very true. And that's the benefit of doing this. All, it's entertaining to watch it and enjoy the products and relive it and all that. The other thing you pull away from it is the application to the current day product and real life, and just taking tangible pieces of what we're learning, because history does repeat itself. It's cliche, of course, but history does repeat itself in a lot of ways. And we're now looking at the product through a lens. We have the hindsight of all these years later to look upon this product. And I think it's very favorable. I think time has aged this like a fine wine or a whiskey in a barrel, because this, you come back to this and it still resonates. Those interviews, they have an effect on you, and it should not have the effect it does for the production value and everything that goes into it. But truly, it moves you to a point where a lot of wrestling today doesn't move you. And, I understand why the Cult of Cornette exists, because there's a certain fan base that was like, this is the way wrestling should be. And this is the way I like it, for sure.
And much like Cornette's podcast, I mean, this is so captivating. You hang on every word to these promos, to the in-ring action. Like they keep you gripped, and your heart's in it, right away. It didn't take long to start rewatching these and then getting really fucking into it. Like, man, I'm so stoked. Look at Candido, look at Tracy Smothers, like heroes, and like you feel it, and like it gives you that kid vibe again, like you're sitting there watching Saturday morning cartoons, but it's Saturday Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and it's the best.
There's a reason why even we saw Paul mentioned quickly in here, because he's, the right-hand man for Todd Gordon at the time. But there's a reason. You look at those Paul Heyman segments with the bloodline and his facial expressions, him and Jim Cornette have bought so much into their character that you don't know where the line of reality and non-reality begins and ends, because they're living this. And every time Jim Cornette's on the screen, I believe he's feeling what he's feeling. I really do. And there's an authenticity that doesn't exist in a lot of ways, that this old guard of Paul Heyman, Jim Cornette, that went through the system of the benefit of going through all different eras of wrestling, all different promotions, getting this eclectic seasoning, if you will. And it shows, because there's a different type of mindset that you don't learn on the PC. You don't learn on just the Northeast Indies. You have to travel the world and work in front of different crowds. And, there's a reason why they still resonate with fans today.
100%.
But that being said, let's officially get our fix. Hulk Hogan tried to pop through the door earlier, but Hogan, will let you in quick. Do your Kobe rage in front of us, and we'll get into all the action through March and April of 1994.
Get your fix.
Yeah, brother.
Who let the goddamn door open? Hulk Hogan got it in again with his crazy eyes. But we're going to get our fix, man. And it's appropriate. We're going to start with WWF just quickly because we're starting to see SMW talent being featured on WWF on the build to WrestleMania 10, which is a big deal here. So obviously not going to sit there. You can go and watch these Raws if you want to find and nitpick and cherry pick all the SMW stuff. But we have WWF in Poughkeepsie at the Mid-Hudson Civic Center on Monday Night Raw. It's a taping. We have Bret Hart getting a little warm up for his title match in the main event. And also the opening match with Owen Hart. He defeated SMW Tag Team Champion Tom Pritchard with Jim Cornette in his corner via submission with the sharpshooter at 12:18 after interference from both Randy Savage and Owen Hart. After the match, Bret and Owen had a stare down with Owen on outside the ring. Cool to see. And Colton, you said before, you referenced Tom Pritchard has influence on the business, on the WWE side of things for a very long time. I guess this is a precursor. They identified they liked something in Pritchard and also Cornette, so they brought him in. Coming in with the titles and stuff on the build to WrestleMania, that's a big deal.
Yeah, man, and also just the fact that like this talent sharing is a two-way door. It's not or a two-way street. It's not that it's just WWF guys showing up and Smoky Mountain. We're getting Smoky Mountain guys, like you said, on the lead up to the WrestleMania 10 card, which is awesome here. And I thought it was cool that we got to see Tom Pritchard in a singles match, which is awesome. You know, like I mean, he's been a package deal with the Heavenly Bodies, with Jimmy Del Rey. We haven't seen them split into a singles match yet in Smoky Mountain. So I thought this was pretty neat that he got a one-on-one with Bret. That's a big that's got to be a nice line on his resume, especially even at this time for sure.
So on the March 7th, 1994 Raw, we had an interview quickly with Vince McMahon interviewing Jim Cornette alongside Tom Pritchard and the aforementioned Jimmy Del Rey with the tag titles in tow. Cornette was also discussing Lex Luger facing Del Rey on a March to WrestleMania house show. So this is a big deal too. Again, the titles being showcased, that might be the most beneficial thing you can have, having your logo and your championship belts out there for people to see. Even in a quick thing, people are like, what's this Smoky Mountain Wrestling? Who are these guys? The exposure right there is bar none, especially on the push to WrestleMania Belcaster. Like this is a huge thing for the Heavenly Bodies to be featured in a spot, interview or not.
Yeah, no, 1000%. Like imagine if, Nick Gage showed up in Dynamite with, the GCW belt, or Mox was carrying it to the ring. It's huge exposure for any company. It makes people ponder, makes people look at it and go, what's that Smoky Mountain Wrestling thing going on here? Like it's interrupting my WWF program. Like I got to look into it and try to figure it out. And I mean, curiosity peaks, and that's huge for Cornette and Smoky Mountain, man.
Absolutely. And on 3/3, we had a WWF event in Anaheim, California at the Arrowhead Pond. Attendance 5,800. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about the amount of people seeing them live in action. The Bushwhackers took on Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey in a non-title match. It went 10 minutes and 16 seconds. Luke defeated Pritchard with a sunset flip out of a backdrop attempt. Very awesome to see. Again, non-title match. Bushwhackers were probably a lower tier tag team on WWF side, but just again, the exposure of seeing these guys come out, be managed by Jim Cornette, attendance of 5,800. That is triple the amount that they've gotten even for that shared show in Marietta. Just the exposure of like, who's this Pritchard guy? Who's Jimmy Del Rey, for their own exposure and getting their own name out there, Colton.
Yeah. And especially like them getting a chance to work a West Coast show, man. I mean, that's like, like I said, there was no internet at this point. Like nobody's seeing them on TV and then looking up their Wikipedia page. There is no such thing. Like the fact that, I mean, who knows, this might've been the first time that Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey got a chance to work the West Coast. It could have been, so I mean, that's pretty awesome stuff to be able to get, not only be exposed to a larger audience and a larger house, but just a totally different territory.
So before we move into the TV tapings, we have just final WWF in Loxheldreek, New York, attendance 1,600. We had a March to WrestleMania 10 house show. We referenced before Lex Luger taking on Jimmy Del Rey with Jim Cornette and Tom Pritchard in his corner. Of course, Lex Luger finished the match off with submission, 8 minutes and 36 seconds. After the match, we had Mr. Fuji and Yokozuna coming to ringside to watch Luger. Big deal. Luger and Yokozuna are main eventers going into WrestleMania 10, where Luger and Bret Hart won the Rumble. They shared that Rumble honor, and Yokozuna as well. Main event situation here. Also taped on the same event, we had Tom Pritchard and Jimmy Del Rey defeating PJ Walker and John Crystal on the Wrestling Challenge. So they got the win on the lower tier show for WWF, but still, you could tell they really had their eye on the Heavenly Bodies. That's like a talent. They were like spamming them during this build because I think they saw something in them, because the tag team was used every step of the way. I didn't see one other name aside from them being used on the WWF side of things.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, you got something that works. Don't fuck with it, right? And if it's getting you exposure, just sit there, smile, spin your tennis racket, and just be like, okay, yeah, this is working out great, baby.
So looking at keep that in mind, because those are all over the place. That's just on WWF side of things, but we're here to cover Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV and the events that happen within our universe here. And let's start with Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV from 3/5/1994. We had 4 matches and a lot of angle development. From Jellicoe, Tennessee. Colton, you said you had more information about Jellicoe that you wanted to share.
You said it right this time. Nice job.
Yes, I did.
But just for a little context for everybody, Jellicoe is on a town on the Tennessee-Kentucky border, so it's like right at the tippy top, like northeast Tennessee. It's a coal town essentially. It was founded in 1878. Current population in 2020 was 2,100 people. So pretty small town these days. Might have been a little bit bigger of a town back then. No, absolutely not. Just looked at it. 1990, 2,400. So it's been just about the same. Maybe one other coal company that was still in business that had another 300 folks in town. But yeah, real small. So for the numbers that they were drawing, they were getting most of the town out there.
Yeah, and so we had 4 matches, as I mentioned. Chris Candido defeated Pat Rose in a squash match. This is to get him ready for that Smothers $2,500 ladder match that's happening in a couple weeks. We had Well Done defeating Robbie Eagle and Larry Santo. We have a kind of a dream match in the SMW circuit with Dirty White Boy, the SMW heavyweight champion, defeating the Beat the Champ TV champion, the Hornet, by disqualification. And so no titles change hands. Cool to see them together. And we also have in our main event, Tracy Smothers taking on Tom Pritchard, one half of the SMW tag team champions. But as far as matches go, nothing really caught your eye as far as work rate. The main thing is continuing the TV and the angles with the amount of attention in the main event and all that stuff with the crowd. You can tell they're really invested, most notably with the SMW champion, Dirty White Boy and Dirty White Girl. The interview that Bob Caudle did with them, Colton, did anything catch your eye for that interview?
This is where they start cutting the promo for the next big show, where it's going to be a street fight where and they're going to be basically, Dirty White Boy says the only way to win, pinfalls aren't going to count. The only way to win is going to be stripping you down to your underwear, which is the first time I've ever heard of a street fight like that. But it definitely caught my attention for sure, man. And just once again, man, props to Dirty White Boy and his promo skills, because he's an incredibly captivating human being.
So we also got a fun video of Lance Storm and Chris Jericho working out, and very done in a cheesy 80s way, early 90s way, which it fits the aesthetic of what they're doing here. Nothing really thrilling about working out, but we'll see more of the stuff, as we mentioned, bungee jumping and any sort of extreme sports. But that was the main function of the show, building up the main event, emphasizing Dirty White Boy as the champion, and building up the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Tag Team Champions. The Jim Cornette promo was very good. Jim Cornette with a lot of passion, where he's pissed with the loser between Express and Bodies about to leave SMW, and selling that to the crowd. You couldn't help but believe like Jim Cornette was legit mad about this. So I'm sure at the time, lack of internet, lack of IWC, someone bought in. Like, I know this is scripted, but that seems real to me. So, because especially Jim Cornette emoting the way he did.
Yeah, no, Cornette can, like, I'll say it again. He could sell a ketchup popsicle to a lady in white gloves. He's so damn good. He's the Southern pro wrestling preacher. He kills it every time he's out there.
So for the 3/10/94, this is the Smoky Mountain Wrestling Armstrong Family Reunion, Marietta, Georgia, Cobb Civic Center. We referenced this a lot during the newsletter. They thought they would draw a lot more people. They had 1,075, with the gate being 9,500. By all intents and purposes, it's a really good independent show. You'd be happy with 1,000 people, but I'm sure they were expecting more when you are having a lot of the WWF talent in a time where they were not doing the cross promotional share. And the card went as followed. We had 1-2-3 Kid defeating Bobby Blaze 12-23. The match went Hillbilly Festus defeated New Jack 627 to win the NGWA title. This is our first introduction to New Jack, not the New Jack we're going to know and love going forward in July. This was just a store brand version, but we will not see the last of New Jack. They will be very, very featured on our Smoky Mountain Wrestling television, so stay tuned for that. I believe episode 4 is when they first come in. We had Tracy Smothers taking on Chris Candido. Even on a cross-promotional show, they're still going to war. These guys are working each other every single night. And you can tell, even on the house show circuit, they're so comfortable working together that it's like watching, butter knife go through butter. Really, truly. Yeah. And we have Ronnie Garvin defeating Kevin Sullivan, Lex Luger defeating IRS, Dirty White Boy and Dirty White Girl defeating Brian Lee and Tammy Fitch, Brian Scott and Steve Armstrong defeating Well Done and Owen Hart, where Scott pinned on Well Done. So at this point, looking at the card here, we also had the tag title match, which was awesome. The 16-minute and 20-second finish with DQ. Make the argument it was the wrong finish. As you're going through this card, and of course, we switched Jeff Jarrett out for Owen Hart. The thing that bothers me, Colton, looking at the way it's constructed, is you have Lex Luger. Why is he working a WWF guy?
Yeah.
Why are we just not able to get together and come up with a finish that works?
I was wondering the same thing. It's like this: you basically just picked a WWF match and put it on the Smoky Mountain card, which just seemed like a really interesting choice to me. I don't know, maybe it was something to do with the fact that it was a short, maybe they didn't have a lot of notice, and Lex wanted to work with somebody that he was comfortable with working with. Not sure, but yeah, it seemed like a really odd choice. I mean, if you get both these WWF guys are going to come to one show, why didn't we get Lex Luger versus, I mean, like we said, we're poor Tracy Smothers and Chris Candido, like they're putting on great matches, but like give them a break. Why can't we get Lex Luger versus Chris Candido and IRS versus Tracy Smothers? Just mix it up for a week.
Yeah, especially a loss doesn't, like Brian Lee took a loss to Dirty White Boy and Dirty White Girl. Of course, it was a tag match, but Dirty White Boy did pin Lee. So why couldn't Lee get in the torture rack and lose to Lex Luger? He's the number one contender to the WWF title. No shame in losing to him. I think it has more of an effect that he hung around with Luger. But maybe that's where the divide was, Belcaster, where they couldn't. We talked about this all the time. Gato and Tony Khan had a challenging time where they had to divvy out who's winning, who's losing, how they're being presented. That's probably a part of the issue here, where the relationship wasn't as cohesive as we probably initially intended. When you look at this on paper, it seems like a beautiful thing. But when you're just doing really isolated island type of matches between Luger and IRS that could have been on a WWF house show at the time, instead of just really integrating the talent, it feels like two separate shows are happening. And that, to me, that's an issue. The only one that's integrating is Owen Hart, who's in there, who it's a big deal, but he didn't have to take a pin, or like there was nothing creative that needed to happen for him to lose. It was just Well Done being the recipients of the loss.
Yeah, 100%. And it could be a whole, list of different factors why Lex Luger was like, I'm not working with so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. I'm working with IRS. So maybe Vince wanted to showcase a WWF type match to the Smoky Mountain audience.
True.
Because they don't, maybe they're not getting enough visual of it. But a very weird spot on the card, especially like, Lex Luger is Lex Express. He's one of the hottest fucking names in pro wrestling in 94. And they're throwing him in the middle of the card against IRS, which, I mean, who gives a shit about IRS? No, not to take away from him, but it's just a weird spot, especially when you got so many characters to come into Smoky Mountain and challenge. I mean, there's so many people to work with there. It just feels out of place on the card.
I just feel that it's probably something to do with the overvalue of wins and losses. I think people are in their head, and that still happens today where everyone gets stuck on wins and losses. We see the issues with AAA and CMLL and AAA Town going to New Japan, and people have an issue with, I don't want my champion losing. But I think we've moved into a point with the progressive mindset in wrestling where Masha Slamovich can be the GCW world champion for a bit and lose an Impact. Just people have to understand, like, if you get over, it doesn't matter if you win or lose. Sometimes you can get over by not going over. And that's a thing in wrestling that is as tale as old as time. But I feel like ego has gotten away, Colton, a little bit here, where the card was not constructed the way they probably initially intended, which I think the gate and the attendance probably showed for that.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, this is a 2,500 capacity venue, and like you said, they did about 10, just under 1,100. So yeah, there's a lot of empty seats, and man, yeah, just I don't know, just interesting decision. I probably did have something to do with this wins and losses, but yeah, I mean, when I see this on the card, I'm just like, oh, did Lex and IRS like get on the wrong fucking plane or take the wrong exit and ended up at a Smoky Mountain show and like, oh well, this is what we've been doing all the last few weeks. We're just going to do it here.
Got my gear. There's a ring.
Yeah.
So we have the other TV from Jellicoe, Tennessee. 4 matches again. Bobby Blaze defeated Larry Santo. Pat Rose defeated Smoky Mountain Wrestling heavyweight champion Dirty White Boy by countout. We'll talk about that in a second because Pat Rose, obviously enhancement talent, and Dirty White Boy's not going to lose for any other reason but angle enhancement. Killer Kyle defeated the TV champion, the Hornet, to win the title. So Killer Kelly's our new TV champion. And the Rock and Roll Express defeated Well Done. So going with the Smoky Mountain heavyweight champion, Dirty White Boy, Tammy and Brian Lee attack Dirty White Girl as she's on commentary. White Boy leaves the ring, saves White Girl, leading to White Boy being counted out. Very akin to MJF losing twice to what's the enhancement talent's name? I forget his name.
Sean Dean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
There you
exactly.
go.
Yeah. One half of the inventory. Or
Exactly. There you go. Thank you
infantry.
so much.
Yeah.
Our time in Ring of Honor was well done. Pun intended. But again, we see this on paper, the champions in action. This is enhancement, the further the feud between former champion Brian Lee. And the other thing I liked about Dirty White Boy here, it was bringing in the human element of him where he is, although he comes off rough and has a lot of edges to him, his woman is in danger and he still has the wherewithal to get out of the ring and put the match aside and go save her. I thought that was pretty well done, Belcaster.
Yeah, you don't fuck with Dirty White Girl and expect to get away with it. But no, it does. It adds a humanizing piece to Dirty White Boy's gimmick, and you're like, oh man, he does have feelings in there. That crazy bastard.
100%. And we have a couple segments building up this ladder match that's happening next week between Chris Candido and Tracy Smothers. We had an opening segment with Tracy Smothers, a decent interview for him, but Chris Candido had a really good interview. Talking at the money is his, very kind of cut and paste, but to me, Chris Candido doesn't get the credit he deserves. Huge fan of him. Definitely missed, and this is what I'm enjoying most about these shows is Chris Candido showing his diverse skill set, really, because it's in the ring, out of the ring. Everything about him screams megastar, just never came to be.
Yeah, no, it's a damn shame that he's not here anymore. But I mean, what an awesome program to see him with Smothers. I mean, this whole time it's been amazing. And I'm a huge Tracy Smothers fan, huge Candido fan, but this is like deep diving on both of them at the same time and really enjoying the aspect of it.
So similar to this, a talk show that we're used to, kind of like Piper's Pit or whatever, it's Down and Dirty. This week has Rock and Roll Express. And of course, Dutch Mantel is our lead host here. He mentioned how it's been 10 years of frustration with Jim Cornette and all the tag teams. Morton says they have declined going to other promotions to stay here in SMW. Morton says one day it has to come to an end. That's why Loser Leaves Town match will be a steel cage match. Morton says if they don't beat the Heavenly Bodies, there will be no more Rock and Roll Express. Little did we know they'd still be working in 2023, doing their damn thing. But this was really well done. And everybody looks at, Rock and Roll Express as an in-ring product, very one-dimensional. But this shows that they have a decent side to them where they can be serious, where it's not all fun and games. And Colton, I thought they did a good job in this promo to hype the match. I was pumped up.
Yeah, man, I loved it. And I will say, though, this is Down and Dirty this week changed graphics from the previous week. I don't like this one as much. I like the 8-bit one where Dirty Dutch Mantel looks like a villain from fucking He-Man universe. I like that one with the purple and the green. I thought that one was way cooler, but I digress. Yeah, this was a great promo, man. I mean, and I like the development of the storyline. Like, this continues to elevate Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Like the fact that Ricky Morton makes the point of saying, like, hey man, we're one of those tag teams in the world. We've been approached by other promotions about coming elsewhere. Like, this is where we want to be. We have unfinished business. And obviously, objective number one is running Jimmy Cornette out of town. So yeah, I mean, it definitely got me hyped. Also, just that white all over print white tiger t-shirt that Ricky Morton wears gets me hyped just on sight every time.
Dude, it shows fashion comes full circle, because I'm sure people watching like 03 like, I can't believe he's wearing that. Now I'm looking at like, I need that shirt.
Yeah.
Love it. But we also had a couple other segments here. We talked about the TV championship match. An okay match, and the TV title is being used as this, beat the champ challenge. Very ho-hum. Doesn't seem as prestigious as we know championships to be. it seems to be passed around pretty frequently. Killer Kyle gets the win pretty easily over the Hornet, which was surprising me because you thought the Hornet would have put up a fight, but Killer Kyle now walks away with the championship. We'll see how long that can last, but title feels inconsequential. Belcaster, I don't know if it feels the same way to you.
Yeah, no, it's not doing much for me. I do like the like saying the name of it, Beat the Champ Television Championship. Like it's got a good ring to it, but it's not really got legs underneath it yet. It still feels like it's just there, kind of like a trophy piece, nothing fancy, nothing, that you're like, damn, I can't wait to see the Hornet come back and get his fucking revenge here. Like, like it's just like, all right, whatever.
Yeah. So I definitely want to touch on that Daryl Van Horn interview with Bob Caudle, where they do talk about Prince Karras getting his championship match. He promises Prince Karras will win the SMW Heavyweight Championship. We've seen it kind of play out in the newsletter, talked about it extensively. But Daryl Van Horn doing his best, Colton, to really sell this character, and he's trying at least, and we're thinking we're going to get a program, but I think there's a lot of people, if you read the newsletter and there's letters in it, which sometimes Belcaster and I would use those letters to talk about, there was feedback negatively about this character that didn't fit what SMW was trying to do. And yeah, I mean, I give him credit for trying, right?
Yeah, you got to give him credit for trying. Unfortunately, I don't think Karras really fits anywhere. I don't think it's just we tried to put him somewhere else. I don't think SMW was the reason he wasn't fitting. I think it was the fact that there's just really not a place in pro wrestling for a 3,000-year-old resurrected mummy.
So we have this main event here with Rock and Roll Express taking on Well Done. Match was a little bit uninspiring for me. I was not a huge fan of this match, and not sure if it's just because Well Done didn't click with them. The crowd didn't react the way I thought they would react. Maybe we're just used to seeing the Heavenly Bodies and Rock and Roll put on these 5-star classics, but didn't resonate with me, which is probably why they realized, we have to end the show with a little bit something better, which, Morton and Gibson got on the microphone. So I thought that was well done, where they hyped up the match. I was expecting more, Colton. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, 100%, man. I thought this left a lot to be desired, which was kind of surprising, but yeah, it kind of left me wanting significantly more.
So we had the promo after they would be saying goodbye to the Heavenly Bodies in Pikeville, really hyping it up, and nothing better than an old school promo where they're hyping matches coming up in the future. And I love that. It's well done. And we see it sometimes. I think most recently on a go home show with AEW. And I remember very vividly that Jon Moxley was like pissed off because they were like, it was when they were still trying to manage time and there was a little bit discombobulated, and he's cutting a promo and he's talking about the event coming up. I love that because it just puts emphasis of like the match happens, remind everybody where they need to go. It's easier said than done, but Excalibur doing the run through the card doesn't always resonate for me. It needs to be the talent hype in the show. I'm going to be here fighting this guy, and this is why you should care.
Yeah, 100%.
So we go to our 3/19/94 show for Smoky Mountain Wrestling TV, Dungannon, Virginia. Colton, do you have any information about Dungannon?
Yeah, man, Dungannon, Virginia is less than 300 people.
Whoa.
It is in Scott County, Virginia. It is currently, I think, total is currently 332. During 94, it was anywhere between 250 and 317. So literal blip on the radar.
It's a growing population.
What is the population of like Gary, Indiana in comparison? Is that like around the same amount of people? It feels like it has to be, right?
No, man. Gary's a lot more than that, just because I think you've got folks
like space,
there are
right?
people that, and there's people that commute in from like Gary to Chicago for sure. So like Gary, Indiana, let me see if I can pull it up real fast here. Gary is just under 70,000 people.
Oh shit!
Yeah, so, I mean this place is like Dungannon is like, the fact that it's even an incorporated town with a name is pretty surprising for its size.
It's like 2 bus rides in Chicago worth of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. There was more people at the independent show I was at last night. So than live in Dungannon, Virginia. But either way, the show took place there. You have one other thing to talk about?
No, I'm just saying, like, it's I'm sure it's just they're banking on drawing folks from surrounding counties and surrounding states, because it is like on the it's far Western Virginia. So it's bucking up against West Virginia and Kentucky both. So they're drawing folks from there because there's not a whole lot.
I wonder what I don't know if it's possible to even look up eventually, but I wonder what the rent was for a venue like that and what went into logistics. I'm sure Jim Cornette would have to speak to it. That is a question for Jim Cornette experience and being sent over to with Brian Lass over there. So maybe we'll send something there to bring us on the radar, because we'd love to have either one of them on the show to talk about Smoky Mountain Wrestling. It'd be cool. But from Dungannon, we had 4 matches. Bobby Blaze defeating Larry Santo. Mike Furness defeated the Beat the Champ TV champion, Killer Kyle, to win the title. Chris Jericho, Lance Storm make their debut against the Infernos. And then we got Tracy Smothers defeating Chris Candido in a ladder match, which we'll talk about that match extensively. The opening the show with Bob Armstrong saying as an announcement, Armstrong says that if the Rock and Roll Express lose the cage match, their alternate team will be the Thrill Seekers, while the replacement team, the Heavenly Bodies, will be the Brian Lee and Chris Candido. They will take care of the remaining contracted matches, which was a cool thing. Colton, you and I mentioned this for this Australia tour, where Impact made contingency plans on when things happen, and to keep the realism of wrestling, where, Rock and Roll has matches coming up. We're advertising them. Heavenly has matches as well, but we have a contingency plan. There was something real about it that Bob Armstrong really, did a good job of selling the importance of this match coming up.
Yeah, it helps you suspend your disbelief just a little bit when you're actually going to address and acknowledge the fact that, like, oh yeah, we might have to do something different if this is what happens. Like you said, Impact did the same thing because Giselle Shaw had that match against Deonna Purrazzo, and if the title was to change hands, that it would be a triple threat match with Trinity, Deonna, and them. So yeah, it's a detail that gets overlooked in a lot of promotions, and it's not necessary, but I appreciate it. It definitely, they're not treating the fans like they're stupid.
100%. And Belcast, I pass to you for this TV title match. Mike Furness might be the worst wrestler in the history of wrestling. I apologize, Mike Furness, but this match, the fact that they gave him the championship, he played it off like he was shocked, and maybe part of the aesthetic of Mike Furness was that he's supposed to be a bad wrestler, because I really hope that was part of it. He was pretending he was out of breath, or maybe he was shoot out of breath. Not exactly sure, but further emphasis that this title is meaningless, Belcaster. But Mike Furness, this is worse than anything we've seen. Might be the worst match we've covered of all the matches. And we covered 1998 where Giant Silva's in action.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Nothing sparked a memory out of this. Like, if you're watching these, you could skip it. If you could skip Mike Furness's whole career for all of it. It's just terrible. But you can tell that they give absolutely no shits about this title. They're just hot shotting it left and right, trying to get shit done. And man, Mike Furness was. I'm glad he's not the champion. But terrible. Terrible.
I will argue, or for a minute, I'm not arguing anything on Mike Furness's wrestling chops. It's awful, but I think the thinking behind putting the belt on Furness is just surely territorial recognition, because this dude is we were talking last week, you guys were asking me about college sports, and specifically college football's reputation and level of importance in the South. This guy is a former, he in these territories, he would have been known as a football player from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville.
Gotcha.
So
he's the Steve Mongo of
exactly. Yes. So he's going to be Killer Kyle obviously is a better wrestler, but they said they bill him from Hell's Kitchen, New York. All these locals, man, the rednecks in the crowd are gonna be excited to see Mike Furness just because they were seeing him play football 2 or 3 years prior. So it's just all on local name recognition alone, I'm sure.
That's fair. I'll take
it. It makes sense, because that's what you got to do if it draws somebody in that was a fan of his in collegiate football. I mean, gets another person. I mean, God knows they need more seats.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? They need more people there. But the other thing I really enjoyed, this popped up after, and this was, of course, not happening on the night, but they did show footage of after the 59-minute and change marathon match that the Heavenly Bodies had with Rock and Roll Express. They had Pritchard and Del Rey using oxygen while Cornette was going crazy, proclaiming they're going to get rid of Rock and Roll Express. Just seeing the oxygen on them with the tank and everything going on with the facial mask and all that stuff was just awesome. And then again, how could you not want to see the match on April 2nd in the cage match? You walked away saying, take my money. I want to see that. I need to be in the building to see it. Really also, well done.
At the same time of them taking these huge huffs of oxygen, Cornette's looking at them both saying, you're in the best shape of your life. Just gassing them up while they're just about to pass out.
So good. We also had... No, dude, it's so good, because we also had Jim Cornette being interviewed by Bob Caudle, and Jim Cornette is a busy dude on the Smoky Mountain Wrestling side. He has other things he needs to do aside from managing the Heavenly Bodies. He wants to kind of finish this business with Bob Armstrong because he's comparing him to criminals who steal your money. Cornette says that their issues will come to an end after 10 long years. Cornette says that you're tough, Bob Armstrong, but he doesn't say who you're going to have to wrestle for the future. Cornette is going to get rid of Armstrong along with the Rock and Roll Express. So nice how he ties in both feuds together. And we talk about this all the time with programming. Sometimes everyone becomes so one-dimensional where they're feuding with one guy. They have issues with one guy. Every promo is about one guy. But it's okay in wrestling sometimes, just like real life. Do you have other things going on aside from this one segmented issue that Jim Cornette and the Heavenly Bodies have with the Rock and Roll Express? You could tie all of them together, and that's also creates these matches that are a little bit more dynamic, where I think it needs to be done more often in wrestling.
Yeah, 100%, man.
So we have the in-ring debut of Chris Jericho and Lance Storm. They come across, I mean, how could you not compare them to a future Rock and Roll Express or the Freebirds, whatever aesthetic they're going for, it works. The girls in attendance were absolutely going insane for them. They kept showing them on the crowd. They finished with the missile drop kick from the top rope, which is a very tag team. And you can also make the argument, maybe planting seeds for a future match at Rock and Roll Express if they are to survive this cage match and stay in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And you could tell that Chris Jericho and Lance Storm are ticketed to be huge stars, and Jim Cornette recognizes that from the beginning. We saw the newsletter, of course, covers it. We know what their careers become, but it's even easy to see in this initial that's like, damn, they see something in these guys.
Yeah. Shout out to Lance Storm's rat tail.
Yeah.
Fucking incredible how that didn't make it through the rest of his career. I'll never know.
Vince would have instantly shaved that shit, damn it.
And it was like bleached blonde too, man. It was it was perfect for the Thrill Seekers look. Like he was not going to commit to a full mullet, but he's going to have a bitch and rat tail, and he's going to bleach to match Jericho's hair, man. I was just like, whew, man, this is what stopped you from being a main eventer in WWF, brother, was losing the rat tail.
If I can be serious for a minute, please shave the rat tail, sir. But the interview after was good too. They cut the most babyface promo I've ever seen in my life. Jericho just elated to be there, saying he can't believe they're in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and Lance Storm doing the same thing, just both excited. And I thought for a first impression for the SMW audience, they have to walk away impressed with these dudes. They have to. Yeah, so we look at our main event here, and Colton, I'll let you lead the way with this ladder match because goddamn, this was the best work rate match I think we've seen the whole time during these first 2 weeks, 4 months to be exact. So it's saying a lot. Unfortunately for them, placement wise, it will be overshadowed by the ladder matches going to be happening at MSG, just, miles down the road, take a car, you can get there by car, but people are going to be talking about Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels when they probably could have been talking about Tracy Smothers and Chris Candido.
Yeah, man, 100%. I mean, I think, name recognition alone's always going to get them with, going to go up against Razor and Shawn. But, yeah, man, this match was great. And when I first saw it, it did get me thinking. It was like, do I have to, I looked it up. I was like, was this prior to WrestleMania 10? Because I was, Fed Brain, man, 100%. I've just always been like, that was the first ladder match I ever saw. So yeah, this was a good one, man. I really enjoyed it. Like I said earlier when we were opening the show, I figured this would be like a big gimmick check to like kind of sell the whole thing, and it's not. It's a regular, just straight out of the paycheck book paper check. But yeah, a lot of good spots in here. One of my favorites was at one point Tracy Smothers gets Candido's head like in between the rungs of the ladder and Irish whips him into the turnbuckle, man. I was like, I don't know if I've ever seen that specific spot done. Like it's pretty dangerous shit. And then, one thing that was cool about this match, we were actually talking on the debate, the one that's coming up this week, where we were talking about what would happen if WWE starts inducting matches into the Hall of Fame. And one of the matches that we suggested was the ladder match from WrestleMania 10. And that WrestleMania 10 match only utilized one ladder, which is like totally unheard of. And they had more than one ladder in this match. So but yeah, this was a pretty awesome all around, man. The finish here was kind of came out of nowhere for me. We have both Candido and Smothers on top of the ladder, and I figured there would be more of a fight. They kind of got on the ladder to fight each other, which I thought was interesting. Instead of, it wasn't one of them going for the check, the other one gets stopped. They just got up to where, everybody in the back could see. And Smothers, he drops Candido and gets the check, man. And it was, obviously the Wild-Eyed Southern boys got to go over here, right? Babyface has got to win, but Candido didn't let him get the last laugh. So it wasn't the Candido popped right back up, knocked Smothers out with the ladder and then ran off with the check himself, which, I'm assuming is blank because there's no, if he makes it to the bank first, that money is his.
It's fantastic.
Just for context, WrestleMania 10 is literally the next night after this airs. So it doesn't take long for people to.
Wow.
Yeah, it was March 20th, 1994. This aired March 19th, 1994. So this match literally stood no chance. It's not like it could be isolated. Oh, it was a few weeks before people remember it. No, literally it was the next night. So if in the wrestling community, everyone was talking about Razor and Shawn while this match existed on its own. And it was good. But I don't think it was ever going to outshine, like I said, the machine behind WWF. But moving on to our next show here. Again, Dungan and Virginia probably taped together. 326-94. 4 matches again. We have Well Done defeating Bobby Blaze and Jason West. The TV championship on the line. Mike Furnace successfully defending the championship against Mike Sampson. The heavyweight championship on the line. Dirty White Boy defeated Killer Kyle by DQ. And the Rock and Roll Express defeated those Infernos that were the victims of the Thrill Seekers. So again, setting the stage for an eventual Rock and Roll Thrill Seekers feud down the line because likewise opponents, maybe I'm looking too much into it, but I thought this was strategically done. And I also thought, that's a big piece to what Jim Cornette's thinking, right? Belcaster, he hasn't let those things slide, right?
No, he is very able to pick out the tiniest nuanced detail and stretch that motherfucker so it intertwines with any other part of the storytelling. He's great like that.
100%. We got another Jericho and Lance Storm thing interview. Very, very big piece of this, everything that goes on with face tag team and making sure that they are recognized and they're on the same level or hopefully be on the same level as Rock and Roll Express. They want to earn their respect. But really the main thing I pulled from this show is Brian Lee and Chris Candido coming out during the main event, attacking Rock and Roll Express as a heel tag team. Didn't expect this. This was a go-home show for the Bluegrass Brawl, which is literally 5 days from this point. They did a good job of setting the stage, but man, Brian Lee and Chris Candido was a combination I didn't know I needed, Colton.
Yeah, same here, man. I like these guys together as a team, and it's just perfect timing too, because obviously, like, we know we're going to need a new tag team in the division because somebody's going home at Bluegrass Brawl. And, you can suspend your disbelief all you want, but we all know that it's the Heavenly Bodies are leaving and we're going to need a new heel team to keep things even in the tag team division. But yeah, this is good shit.
100%. And that leads the way and sets the stage for the Bluegrass Brawl 2, the famous final scene from Pikeville, Kentucky. At the Pikeville College Gym, we had an attendance of 1,850, gate being $11,000 on April 1st. We mentioned those matches happening. Killer Kyle defeated Anthony Michaels. Lance Storm defeated Steve Dunn. And he also then took on Timothy Well and beat him as well. Tracy Smothers defeated Chris Candido in a ladder match, which was not as good as the ladder match they had the night prior, but the week prior, I should say. Jim Cornette and Bruiser Bedlam, as he gets ready for Macho Man Randy Savage, defeated Bob Armstrong in a handicap match where Bruiser pinned Armstrong. The Dirty White Boy and Dirty White Girl defeated Brian Lee and Tammy Fitch in a street fight. And of course, that main event here, Rock and Roll Express defeated the Heavenly Bodies in a loser leaves town steel cage match to win the tag titles and send the Heavenly Bodies packing, Colton. So this was kind of a one-match card, and I know that's probably being critical, but I looked at this as like Lance Storm working twice against a tag team, a mixed tag match. This was seriously, to me, probably a one-match card, and deservedly so. People were in town to see Rock and Roll and Heavenly Bodies end their feud for good.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for at this point in time in this type of town. I mean, you put a steel cage match on the card, that's what everybody's come to see. And doesn't matter who's in it. That's going to be the draw. But yeah, man, this entire show was for Rock and Roll versus Heavenly Bodies. It's a great payoff, man. I mean, we've been drawing this feud out, and I mean, it didn't feel too long to me by any means. But I mean, we've been doing this is 4 months long, like that they've been going back and forth. There's been a lot of great storytelling, starting off with them going after, Ricky Morton's dad and like getting this payoff by being able to kick their asses out of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. And like how appropriate too, because as we were talking, the late January, early February WWF shows where we're seeing Smoky Mountain talent, like obviously they've got their eyes on the heavenly bodies because we've seen a lot of Jimmy Del Rey and Tom Pritchard on WWF shows already.
Yeah, very good point.
No, absolutely. Very good point as well. And I think the next few weeks of shows is going to be really squeezing every ounce of juice out of the Bluegrass Brawl because the TV shows just become kind of compilation. There are some things they do for the TV show that aired the night after in Dungannon, Virginia. We had 4 matches, Jericho and Lance Storm defeating Larry Santo and Mike Sampson. The TV championship on the line. Mike Furness got another successful defense against Inferno. Prince Karras defeated Bobby Blaze, and Brian Lee and Chris Candido defeated the Rock and Roll Express. So the main thing of this show is, having new storylines because we said goodbye to the Rock and Roll Express. We said goodbye the Rock and Roll Express and Heavenly Bodies feud, and they're setting the stage for this Brian Lee and Chris Candido thing. I think you mentioned so perfectly. They needed another heel team, and they need to put the one together quick. And who better than Brian Lee, former world champion, Chris Candido, who is probably the hottest act they have right now as far as heels go. Why not put them in with the Rock and Roll? Who's the best 2 talent you have here? I think it made the most sense.
100%. Yeah. It's got, you get the best in the company going at each other now. I mean, it really, it's perfect way to move on from the Heavenly Bodies feud. And, I love Brian Lee so much. And I mean, we all know Candido's going to be great, but this very akin to like the Wardlow, MJF vibes,
Very much.
You got big guy, you get the cocky prick. It works out so good. Love it so much.
The other thing we saw was the debut of a woman wrestler named Peggy Lee Leather. She's got inserted into this white boy and dirty white girl feud as well. Doesn't seem that necessary. It's taking time away from Tammy Fitch, and we know she goes on to bigger and better things and then goes on to worse things in her life. But as far as wrestling stuff goes, she becomes a huge star, and you can kind of see that with Tammy, and she's kind of involved in, multiple things here in SMW. We haven't really talked at length about her, but Tammy Fitch is someone who becomes very well known in the wrestling business, and someone who's, like I said, goes on to do great things as in ECW and then WWF eventually. But you could kind of see that Peggy Lee Leather to me was taking time away from Tammy, and it's like, why are you doing that? Because I think what they had working with Tammy was great.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like an unnecessary distraction at the time.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's unnecessary distraction. And we move into another episode, which again, this is more compilation of the Bluegrass Brawl, a lot of stuff going on. Dungannon, Virginia. We have 2 matches. Chris Jericho, Lance Storm defeating the Hornet and Mike Sampson. And we have the TV championship on the line. Mike Furness got another defense against Larry Santo. There's something to be said about this local guy, Mike Furness, because I feel like he was resonating with the fans, even though he sucks in the ring, no matter how much he gets going on. But the other stuff, I mean, the Hornet and Mike Sampson getting squashed. The Hornet, I looked at him, former TV champ. We just saw him have the title. He got squashed by Mike Furness. But this is, I guess Chris Jericho and Lance Storm are just being fed talent, building them up to something bigger and better. And they have to fit as much in during these tapings because we know Jericho's going back to finish up his obligations with EMLL and WAR. So, and then Lance Storm, as we mentioned too, I think we said he was getting married, right? That's what we had said. So you could tell they got a lot of stuff taped in here to make sure they have Jericho and Lance Storm on our screens every single week to make sure that fans are very familiar with them.
Now the thrill seekers must be able to be seeked, right?
So this lacked anything of real substance on this show, not even worth checking out. I mean, honestly, it was pretty much, they're trying to rehabilitate that they lost to Heavenly Bodies. Brian Lee and Candido are trying to establish themselves against Rock and Roll. And we continue this Prince Karras and dirty but white boy feud, which doesn't, we know it doesn't have any substance. So when you're watching this, it's like, okay, it's fodder. Keep going. And sometimes these shows following the big events, it's almost like you get to a certain point where everything feels like it culminated. You have to build it back up to a certain level before you start to care again. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, when we were covering ECW, we had that to the build-up shows, and a little bit after the bigger shows that would air. I mean, we would have these taped compilations, and they would squeeze in a match or two here that were taped, on whatever episode of whatever. But it's it's hard to dip dive right back into it once you had such a big blow off. So I mean, they're doing a decent job giving you more filler story, but I mean, it's dragged out. Long form pro wrestling is what it is.
Yeah, this is sort of the nature of the beast here with the way talent and TV is showcased in this time and age. It didn't have to be a certain way. And you're watching this on your screens on a weekly basis on channel 14 in Georgia or elsewhere. This was resonating with the fan base in a lot of ways because of the way they consumed media at the time. So,
absolutely,
we got to remember that as well as we're watching, and we're so spoiled with the production value on a weekly TV show. So we have the 416 TV show from Clinton, Tennessee, another squash match for Jericho and Lance Storm, Chris Hamrick and the Hornet on the losing side of things. Bruiser Bedlam won the TV title from Mike Furness. So they've set him up or setting him up as a major heel here. And then Brian Lee defeated Ricky Morton by DQ. So Bruiser Bedlam attacked Furness before the bell. He dominated the match. He won the match with a claw to his midsection, and Furness couldn't get up, which we've seen this being used. I believe Ivan Koloff used the claw, very similar. We've seen claws used to the head. Do you buy this as a finisher? Because I've heard things, I've read things about Bruiser Bedlam, Colton, that we've seen him now. Do you think this finisher fits what they're going for? Did it have the effect on it or no?
Fuck no. I don't buy this shit at all. I've talked a lot of shit on how I think Roman Reigns' Superman punch is the worst fucking finisher in wrestling history. I retract that statement. This claw takes its place. It's pretty bad. And we've been talking about Mike Furness. It's like, man, what an embarrassing way. Like obviously, like Furness needs to get the belt taken off of him. He's not much of a talent. Kid's got a good look. He's a college athlete, but not only the first date back in your home state, you get taken out by this sorry ass little belly scratch.
The tickle monster.
The tickle monster. Reminds me of Jim Carrey and Liar Liar.
Yes.
You say nobody does it better than Jim Carrey.
The other highlight of this show was the Brian Lee, Chris Candido interview regarding the Rock and Roll Express, really trying to establish them as a top tag team. The interesting thing was Chris Candido kind of taking the leadership role of the team, which you really wouldn't expect because Brian Lee would be, I guess, hierarchy wise, you'd feel like Brian Lee size wise as well should kind of take the lead. But Chris Candido being the leader of this team has me intrigued. But again, they're trying to figure out a way to make this work without the Heavenly Bodies. I think that was the easy playbook, but I think they're making the best of the situation and emphasizing Lee and Candido in a good spot, especially with Tammy at their side. I think the package works.
Yeah. 100%. It's so it works so well that that's where they base DX off of,
So we also have Kendo the Samurai, a segment from Daryl Van Horn being interviewed, saying he's gonna be bringing Kendo the Samurai, and he talks about how the champion will be Prince Karis, and then he's gonna have Kendo the Samurai in his fold. Seems like we're gonna get this like supernatural type of faction that. Whatever. Daryl Van Horn, though, I gotta say, I mean, as far as how goofy everything they give him, he's knocking it out of the park as far as programmatically goes. I don't have an issue with Daryl Van Horn. I have an issue with what they're giving him to do.
Yeah, I like Daryl Van Horn a lot. I think he's just about as good as a salesman as Cornette as far as ketchup.
He's trying.
Yeah, he's being given actual ketchup popsicles and is doing his best. Yeah, but that was my first thought. It's like, well, how old is the samurai going to be? Is this going to be a modern day? Are we getting a 35-year-old samurai, or are we getting like a 480-year-old samurai?
So moving on to Clinton, Tennessee, 4/23/1994. As we wind down April, we had 4 matches again. The tag team champions Rock and Roll Express defeated Killer Kyle and Dark Secret to defend their title successfully. The TV championship defended. Bruiser Bedlam defeated Bobby Blaze to retain the championship in his first defense. Brian Lee and Chris Candido defeated Anthony Michaels and Chris Hamrick. And Dirty White Boy defeated Prince Karis for the championship belt to hold on to it. All right. So this show here was dedicated to the top feuds. White Boy and Karis we talked about it extensively, 3,000 years old, it's goofy, it's a dud, and it sucked. We get the debut of Kendo the Samurai. He comes down, attempts to attack White Boy, fails, spits some mist into White Boy's eyes. Seems like we're going to get a replacement with the Prince Karis stuff. Now it's going to be the Kendo the Samurai. Again, not a huge fan of it. The other feud, of course, is setting the stage for Bruiser Bedlam taking on Randy Savage. And we had this Bruiser Bedlam Cornette promo where, Tracy Smothers comes over, confronts Bedlam. Smothers says he's standing out there by himself, and Smothers tells Bedlam, "This is the South, and I represent it, brother." Challenges Bedlam to a TV title match next week. Cornette agrees to it. Bedlam says he's going to bust Smothers in half with the claw. So the other funny part about this was Smothers tried to get his shirt off being angry, and he couldn't get it off because it was so tight. But, that was pretty funny as well. But yeah, I mean, the other thing that they're kind of highlighting is the Brian Lee and Chris Candido stuff with the Rock and Roll Express, but ho-hum episode for me. But I thought the Savage coming in to fight Bedlam could be huge. If Bedlam was going to be going over, has me interested in Volunteer Slam in a big way. That's what they were trying to do. And, we look forward to that on May 20th, where Bob Armstrong makes it clear to everybody that it's going to be a big show. You need to check it out.
Yeah.
So you got for Savage being announced this way, where they're talking about ripping Randy's head off. It seems surreal that you guys are talking about the Randy Savage, like this. Randy, like that's why I walked away. I was like, I don't know. It seemed weird. Like, is he really going to show up to this place? Like, I'll believe it when I see it, kind of thing.
Like the Slim Jim guy,
that
Macho Man. That's what it was.
The guy that had a monster truck in the commercial. Like, that's it. Yeah, it's a little far fetched, man. I feel the same way, but I mean, I'm still just the same excited about it, and also, I don't know. I'll be interested to see where the samurai seems to be a little bit more. I can buy the samurai a little bit more than Prince Karis. So it's I like some mist in my wrestling. It kind of gives me some Tajiri vibes a little bit. So
Great Muda for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I like the mist.
Yeah, I'm a mist man.
I'm
Could be our new shirt.
I'm a mist guy.
I'm a mist man.
So our final TV show of the 2 months is 4/30/94, Clinton, Tennessee. 3 matches. Well Done defeated Anthony Michaels and Bobby Blaze. The aforementioned Kendo the Samurai defeating Brian Logan in a squash match. And the TV championship on the line, Bruiser Bedlam successfully defending his title against Tracy Smothers. Main thing from this show, dude, is the Jake Roberts promo, sending his thoughts regarding a match with White Boy. Jake Roberts cuts a great promo, says, who was the man who dropped Andre the Giant? Who was the man that played with Randy Savage like he was a toy? Who made Rick Rude's life miserable? Who made Sting close to quitting wrestling? And who also refused to put Hulk Hogan from WWF, who WWF refused to put in the ring with Hulk Hogan? It was me. So, man, I posted this promo before we even did this show. Like, I found this Jake Roberts promo. Go out and watch this promo. Jake Roberts puts out it's school. Everyone sit down, get their notebooks out, take notes. You wanted to cut a promo. Jake Roberts did more there to sell that match than anybody else could have with so little. Like, it's just a tape segment. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
no, that's why Jake was, one of the best. This is a prime example of what made Jake the Snake, man. He fucking just above and beyond kills it. Yeah,
it's just Jake sitting in his fucking living room talking quietly, like it's just it's perfect, man. And like, honestly, this is the question I've been wanting the answer to, is what's next for Dirty White Boy? Because obviously, we've got Brian Lee paired up with Candido in a heel tag run. We need something else. We need a new opponent. We need a new heel to go up against Dirty White Boy. And Roberts was not who I expected, but goddamn, dude, couldn't be. They knocked it out of the park with this one. This was above and beyond what I was expecting for us to get next.
100%. And the other thing, obviously, was Jim Cornette continued to hype up the Randy Savage Bedlam match without Randy Savage there. And this is similar to when Paul Heyman has to be the advocate for Lesnar. He's not there, but they did a good job of talking about Randy Savage. And Cornette says that Bob Armstrong will help Savage get to the backstage after the beating Bedlam gives him. Cornette says that both Armstrong and Savage will be knocked out in Knoxville. Which, dude, I mean, the fact that Smoky Mountain Wrestling is hyping up this May 20th show at the end of, we got 3 weeks until that point. And you have Jake Roberts and Randy Savage. And of course, 94, we got to put in context where everybody is. And Jake Roberts, his star isn't as strong as it was just 4 years prior. And same thing can be said about Randy, but Randy Savage is Randy Savage, dude. He's still the biggest star in the wrestling world, in my opinion, at this time. And for Smoky Mountain to bring him in to work a guy who, conversation, whether he deserves it or not, obviously Smoky Mountain is using this chip on building a guy. Yeah. They used Tracy Smothers to do the same thing in the main event here for the TV title. It was not a great match, but Tracy Smothers tried his hardest to get the most out of him. This is how you utilize a talent sharing pool. where you're like, this is how we utilize. WWF may not look at Randy Savage the same way, but he is still the biggest person to ever walk through those doors that could potentially work with Bruiser Bedlam. And I'm excited to see it at Volunteer Slam.
Yeah, 100%, man.
Any final thoughts on that build here? Obviously, I mean, we could talk about the matches. I feel like the personality profile of Jericho and Lance Storm was more of the same stuff. They were giving a lot of the same flair for these guys, making them baby faces and showing everybody what they're about. We see that a lot of times in old school WWF, where we see a little bit of the character profile because they don't have enough TV time to show everybody's interest outside of the ring. And I thought this was pretty good, showing a lot of the different side of that tag team, because that's how fans start to relate to them.
Yeah, no, I like it. I think it's corny, cheesy, but it's so 1994. It's like that pre rock and roll MTV era, you know, like Pauly Shore is still kicking, everything's rocking, going great. But it works for them, and it does really. They do a good job selling it too. I love it.
And we do see the pre-tape from Randy Savage. It's not as memorable as the Jake Roberts promo because it's pretty quick. And he says he's going to come to Knoxville, and I'm going to be ready for Bob Armstrong, and I'm going to take Cornette and Bruiser Bedlam out on May 20th. So he's coming. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that was the other thing. Like, you look at it like, is he going to come? Like, I don't know. Like, it's still so weird to me. And how do people don't talk about this as often as they do, that Jake Roberts and Randy Savage are on the same card in Smoky Mountain Wrestling at Volunteer Slam? I just, it seems wild to me.
Yeah, same here, man. It's like, you know, Jake, you know, not to take anything away from Jake as a star, but like Jake makes a lot more sense on this card than Randy does. And part of it's the setup, but also, you know, Jake's a Georgia guy. So, you know, he's used to wrestling in Southern territories. So like, I'm real excited for this one.
Hell yeah.
So as we say goodbye to April and we move ahead, let's go to the Chaser and pick our favorite moments from these 2 months of action and talk about what we thought was the best in Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
The Chaser.
Woo! Okay, here we are with the Chaser. Colton, let's start with you. Your favorite part of March and April of 1994 in good old Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
It might be Lance Storm's rat tail, dude. It caught me so off guard. Like I would know. In all seriousness, though, man, probably the payoff of the Heavenly Bodies and the Rock and Roll Express feud. I thought it was set up really well, and you know, both those teams are so crucial to what we've seen out of this promotion so far. The fact that like we would put it up like, no shit, one of them's really going to leave. I thought that was a really bold storytelling choice, but I thought they executed it perfectly.
Mike Belcaster, I pass it to you. What was your favorite part? There's a lot to sift through here, but we got some good stuff this week.
No, and it's hard not to agree with what Colton said. It was done so damn well and beautiful. But I'm going with Thrill Seekers build up, man. I'm enjoying every little bit of it. It's fun to see Lance Storm and Jericho going over these kind of jobber tag teams. They're giving them a prominent spotlight. It's cool to see them breaking through. But I also did want to give an honorable mention to the ladder match. 100%. Between Candido and fucking Tracy Smothers, man. It's such a shame that the Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels one was the night after. That's fucking bananas, man. But I mean, crazier things have happened in pro wrestling. But I mean, it's still a very innovative match. It's, you know, especially happening on Smoky Mountain. It's crazy, man. If that was Candido and Smothers in Madison Square Garden, could you imagine how people would still be talking about it to this day?
Yeah, and I agree. That's my takeaway from this is that ladder match and understanding the context of that it happened prior, and people don't talk about it because it's just bad luck. I mean, the situation is the worst timing you ever could imagine, because if it happened 2 weeks later or 2 weeks before, people would still talk about it. But the fact that it happened pretty much while the other one was happening in the shadow of it, it just never was going to be remembered. And I pulled away that you can really look at the machine for what it is, even in 1994 on the WWF side, the ability to get people their attention in a lot of ways by the bright lights and the shiny glitz and the glamour and all the stuff going on even the World Wrestling Federation in 1994. They're not even close to the huge overhanging UFO mothership that hangs over the wrestling world today. But still at that point, they still had a lot more tools in their toolbox to get people's attention and make people and shift the way wrestling fans think. And that's the other thing I pulled away from this as we continue to watch Smoky Mountain Wrestling and understanding that our wrestling fandom was dictated by, for lack of a better word, the propaganda machine of the WWF side. And we call it Fed Brain here, but we grew up watching, thinking wrestling happened a certain way. And we know that history is written by the victors, but it's interesting to see it through the eyes of watching this fresh and understanding that Southern wrestling is entertaining in a lot of ways where it's always been like, it's not demonized, but it's always been looked upon with a certain type of negativity on the WWF side of things, where we're so conditioned to think that only WWF has created big moments and WWF only created the big events. But long before they were, and during the same time that they were creating moments, we were getting great moments in parallel in different cities and different nights. And there's another example of it. The promos, the in-ring work that we're seeing on some level here, and some of the stars that are coming here. I mean, we're going to talk about this Bruiser Bedlam match, like where he goes over Randy Savage. Like, and I understand like that has to resonate with us for a second and build context of holy shit. Like, if anything, you walk away, and we'll talk about Bruiser Bedlam and I'll do more research about what happened to him and what continues with him. But if you can't make something out of Randy Savage putting you over in any capacity, then what are we doing? You know, that is the golden ticket to being a superstar, whether it's 1994 or 1998. Randy Savage is that guy. And there was only one Randy Savage. Talk about Jim Cornette being a 101. Same can be said about Randy Savage. Oh yeah. Let's get to close the tab. The lights are coming on the bar. We are getting ready for our Friday as the weekend gets started. Believe it or not, we are already getting started for episode 3 of 7. So we're flying through the season. Let's close the tab and tip our bartender.
Closing the tab.
All right. As the lights are coming on the bar, we are saying goodbye for the week. But it's not goodbye. It's see you later. We're going to get ready for episode 3 of season 4. It's going to be airing on July 21st. Next Friday, we'll be covering May and June of 1994 of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, including Volunteer Slam 3 from May 20th, 1994. All the good stuff from the newsletter, all the good stuff from the TV tapings, and continuing the conversation of appreciating the greatness that is the old-timey wrestling of Smoky Mountain Wrestling. Colton, lead us out a little bit. Tell us about what's going on in the debate. We have 4 minutes. Let's get all the shilling in and out.
I was on the debate this last week. The two bad Chads, Tom and myself, talking about a little bit of everything, man. So check us out. Drop in Sunday night for audio, and then interview Sunday night on YouTube, then Monday for audio. Catch me and Ace on Thursday for I believe it'll be our you'll be seeing us day before this, our 4th episode of Brace for Impact. So the go home show before Slammiversary on the 15th. Man, it's going to be a good time. And yeah, like always, man, theturnbuckletavern.com. Please like, subscribe, follow. We're on every platform you can think of. Wherever you want to be, that's where we're at. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Twitch, TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Pro Wrestling Tees. Go get a shirt or a mug, man. We appreciate the love. We have a blast putting out free content for you guys 7 days a week. Keep the love coming.
And by the sound of my voice, I don't know if it's 80 still. By the time Friday hits, maybe it's less than that. We are about less than 100 away from 10,000 followers on Instagram. So follow at the Turnbuckle Tavern, at Turnbuckle Tavern, I should say. That's important. Make sure you guys follow us on Instagram, subscribe on YouTube, all that good stuff. Follow me at ACEFIELD Retro. Follow at Mike Belcaster. Follow at Mullet.mania. We have all the wrestling content. Also, go to RemarkableWrestling.com. Pick up tickets for Remarkable Wrestling Own the Night, September 16th. Motor City Machine Guns are going to be in town. Kevin Blackwood is going to be taking on Desmond Cole in his first defense for the Remarkable Heavyweight Championship. Looking forward to it. Thanks for all the support last week for the show. Space to Place 2 was a success. Appreciate all the love. But man, Belcaster, who's in our ear, dude? It has to be Cornette. We didn't get one Cornette impression at all tonight.
It's always got to be Cornette, man. I
Give
feel
us
like
a minute and a half, a minute and 20 of Jim Cornette leading us out.
By God, if you didn't hear it from us first, the Turnbuckle Tavern, where all your juicy pro wrestling goodness, just like a Wendy's double cheeseburger and a goddamn Colt Sprite, like the heavenly bodies, we're getting out of here. We're blowing towns. We're going back up to the Fed. We're getting Macho Man Randy Savage in this house. But until next week, we're not even going to get a minute. I'm too hyped up. I'm going to have a damn heart attack. Oh my goodness. Let's get out of here.